I do know how this happened, but it's interesting that it did happen to have you two guys in the studio first. So for those of you that are listening and are tuning in for this, thanks for doing that. But I've got Matt Pranka and Mike Pannone in the Ironside studio right here in San Jose, California. Guys, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, great. Absolutely, man.
It's by happenstance. I was having a conversation with Mike about some other stuff. He said, "Hey, just so happens I'm going to be out there with Matt. We're going to be teaching a course or a class, and it would be great to connect." And I was like, "Show me where to fucking sign." Like, I'm all in.
LFG.
Yeah, exactly. And so here we are. And that was actually during that time, Matt was kind of MIA from the Instagram, and everybody was kind of freaking out about that. And since we had talked and kind of we're starting to put this thing together, you appeared back on there and you're making quite the splash as people are tuning in to hear the stuff that you had to say. But anyway, maybe just real quick on that. Just you were away for a little while, just a little break, man, just a little vacation.
Yeah, just needed some other work and other things got in the way. For me, with Instagram, anybody that has interacted with me on it, personally, with DMs, and I put a lot of effort into answering guys that have high levels of commitment, guys that, you put a lot of effort into writing me a long message and you ask me very good questions about training. Like, I do my best to answer them. That takes a lot of time, and sometimes real work gets in the way, and for me, just needed a little bit of a break, a little bit of take some deep breaths, figure out what's important, what's not important. Because I find myself, having the same conversations with different people over time can be really, really taxing. Even though everybody's getting the same look, but to be consistent across the board with that, sometimes it becomes a little much, and I don't think people realize that.
I believe you. I've dealt with that, not on the social media side of things, but just kind of in interactions, working in the fitness business, in the gym forever. You end up having the same conversations over and over and over again. It's exhausting. I mean, it mentally taxing. It's kind of emotionally taxing sometimes or whatever, and having to take a deep breath. Totally get it. I think a lot of people are happy to see you back there. I was really surprised as Mike was putting some stuff up every day the other day, or it was a couple of weeks ago now. Like, Mike, tell Matt to come back. Yeah. And the interesting part about that is they, obviously they make a big connection between you guys because you guys are buddies and have been super supportive of you and been very supportive of me. And that just brings it over to kind of Mike and the going back to the in-depth conversations. And I think that's a thing that people don't realize that both of you guys are doing that. That's how I got connected with you guys I have questions and you guys were willing to answer those, and I try to be very good about not exhausting that, or not exploiting that.
I think there's a fundamental lack of understanding of one thing. There's one Matt Pranka, there's one Scott Howell, there's one Mike Pannone. That's it. There's a bunch of you asking questions. So like, I just asked him a question, he never responded, or he did respond, or people ping you with questions. You're like, no, there's thousands of people that hear something that one of us says. Mm-hmm. And so it's not just you and me talking. There's a bunch of people asking, and they end up asking the same question. So it's like, I don't think they realize how much time put into answering stuff.
Which is why I appreciate so much when people give me time, or they even write me a question or a response or something about maybe something that's happened on the podcast or otherwise, just on the other end of the gym side of the business. Like, thank you for taking the time to draft this or put the detail into this question. And again, some of the times that's not done very well. So then you have to, like, I want to be respectful. I'm not quite getting your question here. Let's develop this question a little bit more before I go into a deeper answer. My point of that being is, I don't think a lot of people realize that and or understand what you said, that this is happening kind of all day long from a lot of different people at a lot of different levels. And I've heard a lot of other guys in the, sort of in the space say the same thing. And it's kind of this throttling ebb and flow of like, how do I control all this and still maintain, I guess in my head, like, am I doing the right thing here? Because is this message actually getting out to people, right? Like, I'm answering your question, but more people should be hearing this, and they're not. So I'm getting the same question again and again and again and again. That's frustrating.
I think part of it is frustrating. I try not to get frustrated with it and understand that everybody, people that have been following what I'm doing for a while, and then there's other people that just got on board, right?
Mm-hmm.
That just found me or just whatever. Because everybody's, in the shooting space is kind of like shadow banned. You don't reach what you should reach. And then, so people come in at different times. And there's value in, there's questions that, very, basic concepts and rudimentary things that I think we've already talked about a lot that other people want to talk, and going back and revisit them. I get messages like, hey, I'm glad you hit that. That's value added and everything. And then it's good. It's good to have those conversations over and over. But I think some people don't realize, like, I kind of prefer, and I think as the community develops and training develops, higher level conversations are necessary, right? We still have to have the basic level ones. But now the way that information is being put out and some things that different groups and guys are saying, and who's an SME, who's not, like all of this and it's like, we've got to have higher level conversations. I believe we have to have them live so everyone can watch, hey, you feel this position? Cool. Like anything that I stand for on the shooting site, right? It's all first person experience that's kind of brought me to this point. So at any point, I should be able to sit down. I don't need to study, don't need to prep. We can have a live conversation about any of the things, right? And that's what I think is kind of necessary to continue to push this ball forward and get people on the right path, when it comes to specifically training.
I agree with that. I think, Mike, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, just what he's saying, the first person conversations, getting on a live and talking they're hugely beneficial to everyone in a whole bunch of ways, because you get to evaluate. People ask all the time. I get messages all the time. Well, how do we vet people, or how do I know who's legitimate or who's not? And it's really difficult to do it in a one-dimensional or two-dimensional format. It's got to be, you have to sit there and listen to them speak and get questioned and then have to respond. And I've seen it countless times on lives where people say things and they get challenged on it and they have no answer. And that is the best way. You're not trying, if you're the person challenging them, I'm not trying to undercut your credibility. Right. I'm just asking you to explain yourself. And when they can't, then it's not like, I don't care. I'm not there. It's not a personal assault, but people need to know that you either, what you're doing, why you're doing it, how it works with specificity. You understand the most likely failure points. Like, you've thought about this in depth. It's not just a wild hair and you decided this is a cool thing to do. And there's so much of that out there, and it's so difficult to dispel in the comments section. Mm-hmm. Like, you got to sit down and you've got to hear people talk back and forth and get challenged and then be asked to validate or justify it. And most people don't want to do that because, like you said, they don't know. Whatever I know. I can talk to you anytime, day or night. You can call on the phone and go, okay, this is what I think. They don't have that. They're trying to remember what they think their right answer is. And it is definitely detrimental.
I think there's too many people in this space, right? It varies with all the different topics that are talking about things that they don't have firsthand experience in, right? It's all theoretical based. And then companies will create an echo chamber around a product or a marketing thing, right? An image. Mm-hmm. And, you always equate it to, like, people build castles around ways of thinking. And as soon as you tell them, like, hey, this might be wrong, they just build the castle higher, or they build another wall. And for them to take that down, and start picking apart, like, hey, I've got to rebuild this foundation. This house is wrong, or I've been incorrect in my thought process, or I see a better way. They don't like that. It's very hard for people to do. And I will tell you that the guys that I know, the guys that I associate, the guys that I freely share information with are always looking for a better way. Like, I will abandon everything that I know to be true in the way that I train the second I see something better, right? Or I'll change what I'm doing, for the sake of evolution when I see something that's better. And the problem is, especially if you get into the tactical training space, newer doesn't mean better always, right? And people, wow, there's the emerging threats. Like, you don't have an understanding of what you're talking about because you're getting your information from social media, from TikTok, from a Discord server. You're watching something happen through videos, right? Through videos and commentary that are designed as marketing to get money to feed these wars and these things like that. So it's interesting. We guys say, hey, I want to have this high level conversation. I want to talk about this. The first question has to be is like, what's your firsthand experience in this? And if it's nothing, well, we can have a conversation, but understand like we're coming from two completely different schools of thought.
I think that's an interesting thing, because when I look at kind of where I came into this, I knew I didn't know a lot of things. I still know very little, right? And I know that about it. So that's why I ask the questions, and I keep my mouth shut, and I listen, and I watch for the engagements of other people and kind of try to pick up what's being asked and how it's being answered and vice versa. And what I've recognized is, like, I think I'm wondering from you guys, can this thing be, when you look at shooting, it's so broad, right? There's so many things, right? When we talk about shooting, what are we saying when we're talking the industry, the shooting industry? Are we talking about law enforcement and how shooting applies there? Are we talking about competition shooting, like practical shooting, USPSA, PCSL or PCL, all this stuff? Like, are we talking about that? Are we talking about just the dude that wants to go out on the weekend with his kids and shoot some beer cans or whatever? Hunting. There's so many different things. Are we talking about the military? So I think what ends up happening is somebody chooses the box that they're in or the thing that they're in, and none of this other stuff, all the other stuff gets discounted. Well, I'm not talking about that. When at the end of the day, it's shooting is shooting. The basic things are the basic things. And to your point, like, when people are coming into it, they've picked a room that they want to be in, or the internet gives them a really easy access to these different rooms, whatever that is, and these different, I guess, genres within the larger thing. And certainly, like, if I'm a police officer or whatever, I'm probably going to pick the thing that's most relevant to me there. But you have all these civilians that are kind of coming in, and they're very good with their guns, and they started over here just shooting beer cans with their dad, and now they're highly proficient shooters that have now entered into the USPSA space or whatever, and they're being, quote, I use this in air quotes, competitive at some level, or they think they're being competitive. And the thing gets really convoluted. And so you have people stepping in, going back to the term SME, that may have a lot of knowledge, and maybe they are an SME of some level in one of these rooms, but that doesn't necessarily apply in all of these other rooms. How do you guys feel about that? Because I feel like that's the confusing piece for a lot of people.
For me, the whole SME thing is, I've never subscribed to that word. Like, you're a subject matter expert of this, that. I just look at it and go, you have varying levels of experience. Okay. I may have more experience at certain things than some people and less than some others, but I have varying levels, but the experience that I have is valid. I can say, this is what I do know, and this is how I know it. And there's a lot of people that just attribute that based on popularity. We were talking about, Matt and I were talking about these guys that evaluate like gear. They're like, oh, I evaluate rucks and stuff like that. I'm like, bro, you've never worn it other than in your backyard. Like, you haven't worn it for 48 straight hours in 117-degree heat. There's stuff that you don't eat, that you don't know that you don't know. There are things there are wear points. There are things that become difficult, but because you have a footprint in social media or YouTube or something like that, and people view you, you're told that you're something that you're not. You believe it. Why? Because you want to. But you don't even understand what's really important, because you've never done anything but wear that in your backyard. And so there's people that get that SME thing becomes the metric for that becomes popularity.
And validation.
Yeah, and then you get validation. There's people in the tactical space that get validation for, whatever it is, for vehicle stuff or for CQB. And you look at it and go, you've never done this at a professional level. You've never done it. And you're saying things that are arguably, no war stories involved. You can look at it and go, that won't work. That just won't work. And you can point to it and go, this is why it won't work, without any anecdotes or anything. And they hide from it. And that's where you get, they work into a space, and then they get enough of a following where people start to call them an SME, and they believe it because they want to.
Because they've been validated by the audience, so that makes, quote unquote,
by an audience of people with less experience than them.
What they're saying valid. Yeah. I think that's the thing that I've learned, but I also see it happening right now. I don't know if you guys agree with this or not, where I've made this statement a lot of times, so forgive me if it's boring to people, but I watched, because I come from the fitness industry, I always, when I came into this, I'm like, oh, this shit right here is about 10 years behind the fitness industry. I watched how that thing kind of evolved on social media and experts and, products and programs and marketing and all that stuff. And it's very, very similar in a lot of ways. And I feel like we're right at this time where it's kind of shifting. Like, if I would just been back, like, even 2 years ago, with the volume of shooting instructors that were out there, I'm not saying there's less volume of those people out there, because I don't know. I just say this: I see a lot less of that people saying that they're experts or whatever, or trying to cram something down somebody's throat now than I did even 2 years ago. So I feel like we may be making a shift. There may be like this curve that's happening right now in the industry. We're getting a little bit less of the nonsense, and things are starting to settle a little bit. Like, and I don't like to say the cream is rising to the top. Maybe you could say that if you want, but I feel like the dust is starting to settle and it's starting to kind of work itself out.
I think I noticed, when I first started teaching, 2020, it was, competition shooting will get you killed.
Exactly what I'm saying.
And then it's like, I would love to have that conversation with somebody, because here I am with my background, also a competitive shooter, and I'm not killed. Like, let's have that talk. And I think what's happened over the years is, over the last, 5 years, last 3 years primarily, is there's enough information out there. There's enough people calling bullshit on it. They're having like conversations that you can see guys that are willing to entertain a very tough conversation specifically about what they're teaching, right? That are willing to entertain it. They're willing to improve. Guys that don't want to do it, it's still worth it. And it's still entertaining to me to poke at that.
Okay.
Right? Until, hey, this is bad, right? Especially you see most of that in the tactical space, right? Guys that are teaching something that they've never had to do really at the level to where they're teaching it. A lot of it's theory based. There's no real understanding of what this looks like when it becomes a post or something like that. And then you say, hey, let's talk about this. Well, no, it's toxic. I don't want to, not worth my time or whatever. It's not worth your time. It's not worth my time to talk to you about this. Let's be completely honest about this. Outside of social media, there's no other world where the two of us have a conversation about this thing that I've done professionally for 30 years. It just doesn't exist.
It's so interesting.
The fact that I'm willing or want to talk to you about it for the sake of this community, for the sake of guys, hey, let's write it. The problem is, it's not about, I don't want it to be catastrophic for that business. I don't want it to end what you're doing, but the conversation needs to be had, because you have now a lot of people out that are true experts at this, that have done this professionally, that continue to do it professionally, that are willing to say, that's not good.
Why do you think people have such a problem with that? I mean, let's just put the ego.
Money.
Okay.
Yeah, it's money. It's all cash. That's exactly what it is.
It's money.
I think the ego is secondary, but it is money. Because if all of a sudden, guess what? Your God is fake. That's a problem. And these people are selling. I call it selling magic. They're telling people that there's something that they're not. And not to be crass, but it's the fat guy in the front row of the strip club. Mm-hmm. She's going to tell him he's awesome and he's super hot because she wants his money, and he's going to believe her because he wants to. And they're constantly telling people that they're awesome when they know that they're not. And those people know that they're not, but they want to hear it anyway. And that's revenue generating. But those people also, because I've had run-ins with that in the same vein, they won't talk about it. And if you do criticize it and you tell them, hey, well, I'll talk about it, they will refuse again. And then if you criticize it a third time, they'll just block you. The minute you do something that they look at as jeopardizing their money, because people say, well, it's a personal assault or it's their credibility. Your credibility is your money. Okay. And if you say something, say, this is arguably wrong. This is just wrong. This is silly. They'll cut you off right there.
Even if you make, recently there was a video I posted up that was somebody talking way too in detail with very weird term about, how to walk through a doorway.
It's been shared quite a few times, man. I'm very familiar with that already.
And my knee, bend my foot, whatever.
Right.
And, didn't tag him in it. It was like, hey, this is classic example, right? This is, and I think it was bad what I wrote. Something like dipshits talking about stuff they don't know anything about. Mm-hmm. And it's instantly like blocked. I get it. It doesn't mean like you can block me all you want. I'm still going to talk about that because you're now in a space doing something that I think there needs to be a higher like ethical microscope put under, right? We're training guys to do something, to teach them a skill that they're going to need on their absolute worst day, right? And it's like, you don't have to talk about backgrounds or pedigrees or anything. Let's just talk about common sense, on that. Why are you focusing on something that is an insignificant part, right? It would be like in the fitness world, I'm going to give you a 2-hour class about how to hold the dumbbell.
Right.
Right. That's
or worse, go out there and try to do that on social media. Because people are going to say the same thing about that you're saying about this particular video. And that's my responsibility to know how to present information. Because I think people put something like that, like, well, you didn't hear the rest of the class, or you only saw 15 seconds of the video.
Context.
There's context. Yeah. Well, then why did you decide to show me that though?
Yep. You gave me the context. You presented this to me and I'm responding to what you presented. Stop telling me that well, there's more to it. Then you should have put more to it.
That's my challenge with that answer. It's like, okay, well then what was it? Why did you choose to put that part out? Because the only reason I think you would put that part out is because you thought that was really important, really unique, or really, really magical.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
That would get you, engagement or attention or whatever. And that's the reason you put it out. And yes, that is social media to some extent.
It's going to get you attention and engagement, just not the engagement and attention that you want. And that's always the thing, right? Where you're like, and it's the same, well, you don't get the context, but I didn't make the video. Right. Right. So
it's a dodge.
Let's talk live.
You have a responsibility.
And you give the whole context to it, right? I'm very clear with what I present. The videos that I put out show what I want to show, and the context is in the write-up, right? And, if I talk on the camera, then the explanation is there, right? I try to provide all the context so you can leave from a 1 minute or 2 minute video or even a 30-second video and understand the message I was trying to convey, right? And now if the questions come in, I'll freely answer those questions. I'll answer them in because I'm responsible for that video. But when you start asking, like, I think let's have that long protracted conversation about techniques to walk through a doorway. Like, how many doorways do you think you've walked through today? I know since I've been in this building, I've probably walked through 6, in the last 30 minutes.
No problems with any of them?
No, it's amazing, right? I never once had to think about where my feet were going or what I was doing. I didn't just run into the door jam.
I
used
the lever,
open hit my head on the door.
Right.
And I think, that when you talk about kind of the supporting tasks around a thing you're trying to train, you're missing the point on what's about to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the CQB is kind of what we're talking about now. So the point of performance of the work, the hard thing to do is not how to get into the room, not how to get to the target, not how to move down a hallway. It's what happens in the room once
you're there. Yeah, got it.
That is the hard thing. That's the conversation. That's what you need to train, right? Apply some critical thought to it. Think about what that's going to look like. And then you go back, you leave the house, you go back to the range, and that's where the work happens. But too many people I see, right? They don't have the foundations, right? It's like you're building a house on sand. It could look like a great house, right? And you keep building more and more on it, right? You got the first floor done. Now we got to put the roof on. Well, now the house shifts a little bit. Now we're going to put we're going to finish the attic, put more weight into it. Now we're going to move furniture, and it starts shifting and breaking, right? Because the foundation, the start point wasn't developed. It wasn't built correctly. And that's what as a consistent message for the last 5 years, is trying to get people to focus on.
Yeah, it's we call that around here trying to major in the minors, right? And really what the majors are, the majors should be are the fundamental things. And what you're saying in that particular case is it's what the fundamentals are, what's happening inside that room. Like anything outside of that is a minor thing to be talking about right now. We have to figure out what's going to happen. Let's talk about the end. Right. And what we want to have happen at the end. And then we can we can kind of reverse or engineer our way out of here.
And the major things have to happen with very little cognitive effort.
Yes. So again, majoring in the minors, like you don't have the foundation laid, or you don't have enough downloaded on the motherboard in order to be able to do this or process this thing. So you're stacking things on. It's like trying to put the latest Apple operating system onto a Commodore 64. Yep. You just don't have. There's just no space for that.
We do that. We do that with other stuff. Like think about a race car driver. He doesn't think about steering and braking and any of that. It just happens. He goes, I need to be faster into the corner.
Right.
I need to pick a different line. I need to brake. Like, I need the car to be slower here. He doesn't go, I need the car to be slower here. I need to put on the brakes. Where's the friction point? Where am I braking traction? None of that. That's all done. That's all component stuff. Now he's reading the track and he's making the car do intuitively what he wants it to do, to take it away from the whole, like the CQB thing. It's a processing thing. And I hate to use the term processing, but it's how your brain processes the information based on its skills. And so it's like, if you have to think about stuff that, if you have to think about how to make something happen in a confined space, you're already wrong. You should just go, this needs to happen. That should have, like, this has to happen, and it just happens. I shouldn't be thinking about how am I going to make it happen, or can I even do it? Can I make it happen? That's the concept behind overdeveloped skills. I mean, it's like that you are not thinking about how the problem is going to be solved. You just go, there's a problem that has to be solved. There's another problem.
It's automatic.
Yeah, it does. It's because conscious thought is just slow, and it just says, it shows that your skill level is not where it should be.
It's funny that I felt like you were kind of backing off that word processing, like it's almost too sciencey or whatever. But this is the thing.
Overused.
Yeah, I get that it's overused, but if you're having a hard time, not you, but if somebody's having a hard time listening to that word, then that's a clue. Yeah. Like you're not there yet, because that is a thing. That is, there is processing speed that is happening. I don't want to beat that up. Yeah. I'm just saying, like, I get where you're like, yeah, but somebody's going to hit me. Oh, now we're getting sciencey and like what's going on or whatever. That I don't think that at all. Like, I think it's a valid statement.
It's like I said, I just kind of,
whether you call it happening in the background or processing speed, we're talking about the same things.
Yeah, everybody talks about, well, you got to build up your processing speed. It's impossible, right? Think of it, okay, your brain is a computer processor. You've got 8 gigs of RAM, right? So without, how do you take a computer and do you use it more? And now I've got 16 gigs of RAM?
Right.
It's still 8 gigs of RAM, right? The only thing you learn how to do is you learn how to, if I want to use 10 different programs, I learn how to use them in the right order. And I shut programs down when I don't need them, and I spin ones up when I do need them, right? And what happens, though, in CQB is guys go in, they're overcome by events. They open up every program on the computer, and now the processor sucks, right? And the mouse won't move, and it's glitchy, and it doesn't work.
It's too much.
Yeah. So I think, never once in my entire career in the military, or even currently, have we ever talked about processing speed. Ever. You talk about reps, you talk about inoculation to environments. You talk about inoculation to situations. It's like, and I always use the analogy, think of the first fight you were in, when it was okay. You're old enough like me. We got into fights in school, right? The first fight most people have is in like 4th or 5th grade, right? And then think about the last fight you had in high school, maybe right after your senior year. And how did you feel in both of those times, right? Nervous, shaking.
They're totally different.
Right. Couldn't function. And then the other one, it's like your processing speed didn't change. You just got inoculated to an environment, and you got more comfortable operating in that environment. The processor's still the processor.
It's funny you mentioned that. So we were talking about the dog and the dogs. This is a good way of looking at it. So I was telling you, my buddies here locally, Spectrum Canine, I'll go out and watch the trainings with the canine units. And a good deal of the training is exposing the dogs to the exact thing that you're talking about here. All different kinds of environments. They're still moving at the same speed that the dog moves, right? They're going, the dogs go, they have a job, they know what they're supposed to be doing. Some do it better than others, some are faster than others, those kind of things. But they're going to do what they're going to do. It's what the dog does. However, like, what happens when you put a slick surface in front of them? What happens when you put, like, they have to go through a big cardboard box or go through a bunch of trash cans to get there. Plus they got noise and rattle cans, or, you got the decoy screaming and yelling at them, and they constantly amp the thing up. And it's interesting because I watched a training with these guys once where they brought in a other unit. They were kind of a tryout for this. They were the other department or agency was kind of, I guess, auditioning them. How would this work? So they brought their dogs in, and basically they gave their dogs this place that was this agency was auditioning this scenario for their dogs, and all 7 of their dogs failed. They ran from the decoy. The decoy came running out of the room, screaming, yelling, rattle cans or whatever, and none of the dogs would go on bite. And then they brought in the other dogs, right? Their dogs, and those dogs engaged, and it was simply because they hadn't been trained. Well, then they hire the guys on, the guys train up the dogs. And there was a few dogs that probably shouldn't have been there in the first place, but they were still able to get them to do what they needed to do just by exposing them to that environment, to that situation. The point being is the dog's brain is still the dog's brain. It still has the ability, the capability to do it. It's just, well, how is it going to respond when faced with something that it's never seen before? So they're constantly giving these dogs these new stimulus on a regular basis. Really wild shit, you know? Yeah. But it could be a leaf blower, it could be a chainsaw with no chain on it. It could be, they come up with all kinds of crazy stuff. But it's not that the dog bites any harder or bites any less or is any less accurate with the bite. It's just, how are they dealing with what's sitting in front of them to ultimately get to the end result? I don't know if that's a good analogy or not, or a good example, but that's like alligator dog brain. Versus,
I think it's a good analogy. The only question it would be, like, from, you know, the CQB thing in that training, like, when do we introduce people to that, right? And I think it's like when, you know, because you don't do that training with a puppy. You don't do that training with an 8-month-old dog.
They're learning fundamentals.
Yeah. You have to. So when do you introduce someone into that? It's when they have their understanding of how to use the tools that they're going to apply, like, you know, the guns in that situation are developed at a level when they can deliver point of performance of work at a, you know, at a very high level for that situation.
Right.
And that's what I think gets missed.
So let's go to this live thing, right? And just having the live discussion, because you made a point earlier about that's where that conversation needs to happen so everybody can hear it. And I think that's the upside and I think that's the beauty and the power and kind of the downside of like social media and that particular platform being Instagram, right? In that this conversation could be happening on the back end in some kind of DM situation, right? Or it could be happening on the phone, you know, in one-on-one. But what you're asking is, let's have this as a public conversation so everybody can hear it. It's just like what we're doing here. Yeah. Right. It's just like what we're doing here on the podcast. It's just, this takes a lot more production, right? We got to get everybody in the same place at the same time. We could do this remotely or whatever. It gets produced, it gets put out. It's a week later. People have time to prep or, you know, think about things. Questions are often prepped. Mine are generally not. We talked a little bit about some concepts we wanted to cover today, but it's just, let's sit down and I have some questions I'd love to ask and kind of see where it goes. I think those are, and I hesitate going back to words that get used a lot. Like, I think it's authentic, right? It's organic in a sense. And Mike, you said something earlier about that's how I want that conversation to go with the person on the other. I don't want it to be scripted. I don't want to hear what you tell everybody, like your students. I'm not one of your students. I'm a peer, so to speak. And I just want to have a higher level conversation about this. And so I think people look at the live situations, and initially I go, man, I don't think I'd want to be on a live because, you know, that'd be a scary place for me to be in this genre. But you want to have a live with me in the health, fitness, nutrition space? No problem. Let's talk.
That's the point.
Yeah,
is that when you get on a live, when I get on a live, or when Matt's on a live, or if you're on a live and you're doing the fitness stuff, you're talking about things that you genuinely understand experientially, not just technically. Right. I can read a bunch of books about being a brain surgeon. I'm not a brain surgeon.
Correct.
Okay, but the combination of experiential knowledge and technical knowledge, I can put them together and go, this makes sense. I can look at things just from that and go, look, one of the things that people don't realize that don't have experience in any kind of stressful situation, that talk about stressful situations, is the ability to filter out what you don't need to hear, listen to, look at, things that aren't important, that may be flamboyant or loud or whatever. You can look at it and go, I don't need to know that. And if you can't do that, you become overstimulated. Everything is grabbing your attention. And it's, if you know that, then you understand something that others don't get. And they don't, if you are overstimulated by all the events, all the sounds, everything that's going on, and you still have to try and do something else, you still have to try and run a tool, it doesn't work. And it becomes a way to defeat systems, defeat things. I worked on a gunshot detection system, validating it. And I just wanted to know, literally, and here's a processor, I want to know how does this processor work? How does it process the information when a bullet goes by? And the whole goal for I was contracted to defeat the system. And I could. And I knew how to do it because I understood how the thing worked. I knew how to give it too much information because it couldn't stop the information.
I understand.
It could not filter out what I was going to give it. And so I set up a problem it couldn't solve, and it gets an error. And so but that's the thing that people don't understand that have never been, and it all ties it together. It's the first time you got in a fight in grade school versus when you got to, fight working at your auto body shop, getting ready to go in the Marine Corps.
Right.
Okay, it's a completely different thing because now you're not overstimulated. Everything isn't kind of new and freaky. You're like, okay, I've done this before.
We've been here before.
Yeah. Okay, I got hit in the mouth. Okay, that hurt, but nothing's broken. Let's keep going. But there are a lot of people out there that don't even understand what that feels like, and yet they jump in the space and they talk about stuff like you have no idea, other than you read Dave Grossman's On Killing. That's great. That's trash. Like that was written by a guy that has no experience. It's all theoretical, and that came out before 20 years of conflict came up. And then all of a sudden, a bunch of us were like, "Man, that's not really how it works."
Yeah,
and so you read the book again. Read a bunch of books about brain surgery. Not a brain surgeon.
Yeah, I think this was shared with me. I think it was Craig Douglas who shared this with me on that on that. It was it's like virgins talking about having sex.
Yeah,
it's kind of a weird thing. Like, why would you listen to that? But so where this really comes up for me and kind of the challenges and particularly the way I see it happening in some of the content and some of the things that you guys have done together, but also individually, is a lot of stuff that revolves around the law enforcement space and or military space, but more law enforcement because we're not currently, in any kind of a conflict that we, can draw direct lines to. But a lot of people are trying to bring in, oh, well, what's happening over here at this part of the world? And, look at what they're doing here. Well, I hesitate to bring this up, but I think it's a hot topic. That's like the CQB stuff or just the close quarters stuff, period, whether it's indoors, outdoors, or whatever. That is, what's happening in Ukraine versus what's happening in Gaza versus what's happening in this body cam worn footage or body worn camera footage from this particular incident here, to trying to compare to something that happened in Afghanistan 15 years ago or something like that. I think this is where the challenge comes in terms of where I see heads butting, right? Look, we have a large population of people that think that this thing is very important, whatever it is. In this case, we're still on the CQB topic, right? That this thing is very important and it's a part of an officer's or a team's, duties on a regular basis. So we want to make sure they have the right tools to do this with, yet we're drawing on information that came from a completely different place on the planet, right? During a completely different time. We can talk about some of those things. And we also have a large population of people that maybe were involved in some of that stuff at a particular time 15 years ago that are now kind of moving out of the industry of law enforcement if they'd moved into it. And maybe we're trying to share some of that stuff. And we still have instructors teaching stuff that have not done law enforcement, or maybe did for a little bit, that were in that thing 15 years ago that are still teaching that thing now. And there's this huge disconnect of like, what do these guys need versus what are they getting versus what's being talked about? Like this goes beyond the CQB thing. I think this goes to a lot of things. Yeah. And these are answers I've been trying to get, trying to get on a lot of stuff, like whether it's been on this format or just otherwise, is like trying to understand what these guys need in order to be successful. Mm-hmm. And then obviously, if you could identify that, then what do you value, right? And where do you put the most value in terms of how you design your training, right? Where do you put your resources and efforts?
That's one of the things that that's a great topic. But one of the things that I see that most people don't do, that people at our level do, it's the first thing you do when you walk through doors. Ask some questions.
Right.
Stop being the freaking good idea guy from out of town with all the answers. Go, what do you do? What do you face? What kind of threats do you face? What training resources do you have? Start asking a bunch of questions. How do you do this? Before you talk about how you think they should do it, you probably should know how they do it. But a lot of guys don't want to do that. They want to come in and be the good idea guy. They've got something to sell. And it's not knowledge, it's a shtick. And so that is yesterday in the shoot house. Go in there and go, what do you guys do? Like draw it on a dry erase board or walk us through. Show us what you actually teach, and then we'll talk. Before then, like, why? I'm not going to come in there and change everything, and I shouldn't, because that doesn't work. I mean, just in departments and agencies, it just takes a longer period of time. But I need to know what we need to work on at points of emphasis. And a lot of guys come in and they've got the answers. They don't even know what the question is yet, but they've got the answer, and that's a problem. I see it all over the place. Every time I do something with a department or agency, they ask me, I go, what do you do? What do you like? What do you carry? All the equipment. What do you have? What training? What is your training pipeline that brings these guys to whatever position they're in? What do you want to be able to do? What kind of resources can support? I ask a ton of questions because otherwise I'm just talking out,
Yeah, you're bringing your ideas in. So, okay, let me make sure I hear you correctly because I like where this is going. And that is people, agencies, customers, civilians, whatever. They're hiring a coach, they're hiring a product, they're buying a product, they're hiring a coach, whatever it is, to learn how to do a specific thing. And they're just being delivered that thing, right? Whatever it is. What you're saying is if you're an agency and you're bringing somebody in to teach you whatever the skill is, whatever the particular foundation or fundamental is, you're talking about going through an assessment process to know where to start to deliver that information.
It's fitness. I'm going to come in here. I told you I'm going to do that. I'm going to do a tactical games with Eric.
Right.
If I just came in and said, "Hey, Scott, I want to be in good shape," what would you want to know? What would you ask? Like,
I have 75 questions.
Yes, exactly. Because you want to give me the appropriate product. You want to get me in. You want to provide what I'm asking you, what I'm paying you to provide. But to provide that, you actually have to know what it is, and you have to know if I'm doing something wrong, or if I'm already doing some good stuff, and you can add to it. That is something that I see all the time because that is an educated approach that says, I want to know what you do first, and then I'm going to tell you what I see, and then we're going to talk about the rest. And I've watched it countless times where people come in and go, no, you need to do it this way. And it happens, especially with tactics. Here's a perfect example. Pat and I do vehicle stuff. And they're talking, well, we always go on a passenger side, approach and all that. Okay, great. It's like, you ever been on a road in Texas? There's a big culvert. Now what? Like, well, then they start stammering. I'm like, no, you've decided that this is the answer. Mm-hmm. And you haven't taken into account all the factors and their geographical location differences and formats of roadways and all that. You haven't taken that into account. You have an answer and you're going to sell that answer. And so that's why when people don't ask questions, they tell me that they're not really interested in what you need. They're interested in how to get their hands in your pockets two at a time.
I think the easy pathway, like on social media particularly, and again, we'll just call it the internet. I keep bringing up social media. It's just the internet in general, is that people can get answers to questions that they didn't know they even had very, very quickly. And I guess what I'm saying there is I watch a video on whatever it happens to be, and that's how you do this. But I never asked a well-developed question to understand what answer I was trying to get or what answer I was looking for anyway, just as kind of an idea. So moving on from that, my question would be is like, how much responsibility is on the consumer, particularly like a law enforcement agency, versus how much responsibility is on the deliverer of that product or that thing to make sure that you're on the same page? Because what I see is I see company X out here. They're doing a good job on their social media. They seem to deliver a good product. Nobody's eating them alive, on lives or whatever else. So that must be good. And I kind of like what they're doing. And I might ask a couple of people, like, what do you know about that? Oh yeah, they're awesome. Whatever else. Cool. Let's have them out to teach our guys stuff. And then they show up and then they just teach the guys what they're teaching everybody. They teach their team whatever they're teaching anybody else without that connection. It's like, well, let's do it. Let's figure out, like, what do you need? Because that's how I got into a lot of training. It was like, oh, that looks like something I might need. So I would sign up and I would go. And then I would just sit there and get delivered what I paid to have delivered to me with no connection. And then that's when I stopped and I was like, wait, hold on. Where does this go from here? Like, I need to do a better job at asking questions to make sure I'm getting what I need and want out of the training. And as I started to do that, I recognized that there's a lot less of this training that I actually need. I need more practice rather than the things that I already know. But my point being is going back to like law enforcement agencies and or whoever, whatever agencies or teams, how much responsibility is on the consumer's perspective versus how much is on the provider's perspective to get this shit figured out?
I think a lot of it falls on the consumers. I think a lot of the situation in the market was created by people wanting it. Right? Just out of pure, hey, this is what I want, right? Like civilian CQB never existed.
Need versus need, want versus need.
I want this. Like, well, do you need it? Like, my question is always, and I constantly get beat up for this, right? It goes to where like, I am so Second Amendment now because I just ask questions about this, or because I don't run open enrollment civilian CQB courses. Like,
so you're anti-Second Amendment?
100%. Like,
okay.
Based off the internet.
Okay.
You know it's got to be real because it's on the internet. So my question would be, like, you want to do, a team-based CQB course, right? What is your intention? If it's like, hey, I'm just interested in this, never served, but I like watching it, whatever, I want to do it. That's a valid excuse. Now, if your excuse is like, well, I just got to be ready. It's like, okay, I agree with that. What team are you on? Did you bring your whole team here for this training? Like, what is you're talking about a team-based event that we're going to teach, what team are you on? How does this go? Like, when the course is over, what's your plan to sustain it? What shoot house do you go train in, right? Do you have UTMs, right? You're a civilian. You can't fucking buy UTMs. Like, I can't buy them. It's, it's like, so where does it go from here? And at that point, it just divulges down to, like, I get you want to do it because you're interested in it and it's fun. It's entertaining.
Okay.
It's entertainment.
It's America.
Entertainment.
Right?
Where it gets confusing is now we're talking about, you have the same guys putting that out as a civilian thing. It's like, hey, you can do whatever you want to do. I get it. But the way that you can do whatever you want to do, I can also say whatever I want to say about it. I don't have to support
Good
it. Because the bleed over is now you have teams that are watching your content. Like, a lot of people are taking training from YouTube and then they take it back and they just emulate it and, whatever, maybe the context isn't there or they don't really understand it. So it's like, you've got kind of people that don't know what they're talking about, training people that don't know what they're talking about. And what happens with that? So now you've got guys who used to do the job, don't do it anymore, training guys that are doing the job for their worst day. And this stuff, like this information gains, like the concepts, they gain a lot of speed. Like, it's like a boulder rolling downhill. People are like, this is what we do, right? Or departments are like, well, we had this company come out and now we're doing this, right? Most agencies possess the appropriate amount of information and experience to come up with their own way of doing business.
You think so?
100%.
Okay.
The problem is you have to now apply, like, you have to create understanding amongst the team that's going to have these discussions, right? You're going to have to apply critical thought to what you're doing and know the questions that you need to ask. We're doing this. Is this going to work? Right? You could take one simple thing and then just look at it from all different angles and have guys try to pick it apart. Right?
Which is essentially what kind of the live is.
100%.
Right? Yeah, gotcha.
It's like, let's talk about it. Like, I don't share this opinion with you. I don't agree with that. Let's talk about it. Convince me.
Okay.
Right? And I don't necessarily want to convince you. I don't think I'm going to, but we can present it and then let everyone else hear it. And now the consumer is informed and they can make the decision what they want to do.
At least they have a choice versus what's being force-fed to them, is what you're saying in terms of the information pathway.
The thing, when you get on lives, you start talking, if you listen to the lives, like the ones that Matt's done, I've been on with Matt before, and other guys, Chris has been on. Yep. It's I made it into almost like a template, but if you listen to the logical thought process, it's always the same thing. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? How does it work? Like, with specificity, what is the mechanism of success? What makes this work? Okay. What are those most likely failure points or mistakes you can make? How do you remedy those with training, or how do you, mitigate them with training, or remedy them if they have? It's always the same sequence, but it's a logical pathway. What are you doing? Why are you doing it? Like, you gotta answer those first. And a lot of departments that I've been around, they're doing it, like I said, because some other guy who has very little experience is telling them they should do that, but they don't have their own independent, template to go, okay, let's evaluate this for viability. And then after all of that's done and it looks great, can we even support it? Do we have enough training time and resources to actually be able to maintain this capability? Or are we just burning money with some fantasy? And so I think that the approach that is just built into, it's built into an illogical evaluation of something they don't even have. That's what I see. Because it's always, when I listen to it, because I purposely, I listened to a bunch of different lives that I wasn't a part of, just watching, Matt or other people talk that are legitimate, Chris Palmer. It's always the same thing. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? How does it work? It's like, that's the start point. And you see people, this is what we're doing and it's the best. Like, whoa. we're missing some steps here. And I think that is, there's no, and I hate to make it over academic, but there's got to be some like academic foundation where we have a template we look at and go, how does this work? Why am I doing this? The thing is with tactics, unless you're actually doing it, there's no way to go, this doesn't work or this does work. With fitness, you can tell,
right?
Like it's quantifiable. And with sport shooting on the shooting side, because it's all our different things.
Yep.
Okay. On the sports shooting side, there's a timer, there's a score. You either did or you didn't. You either can lift that weight up or you can't. You can climb that rope or you can't. Tactics is opinions at a certain point. It shouldn't be, but it's become that. And that's because there's no logical way. They don't approach anything from any logical format and say, this is how I evaluate these things. They just kind of take, hey, you look like a cool dude. I'll take your word for it. And it's that ties, everything is tied in together to the whole social media. And now you've got people on there that have a following. And they've got such a strong following in certain law enforcement circles that nobody wants to be the guy to say that, the emperor has no clothes. And it's the whole thing. I've watched it from its beginning. And something that you said all the way back at the beginning when we started talking is what you said, it looks like it may be changing. It is, because there's people like us that go, no, that doesn't work. There's people speaking the truth out loud and saying, I don't care if you don't like it. And that is, I get messages every single day saying, oh, love what you're doing. Love you, Matt and Ben. You guys are doing a great job. You're bringing things to light that nobody wanted to talk about. It's because it's arguably valid and true. And we're not going to back away because you're whoever you are. I don't care.
One of the things I've heard you guys both talk about is just on the same thread, but also changing gears a little bit is, okay, so if it is changing, we're kind of starting to see this shift happening, like, maybe what we've been doing and all that money we paid this guy to teach us this stuff isn't so great after all. Like we've had to change this, or we had somebody else come in and kind of uncovered some flaws, or we have this new guy on the team who's actually done a little bit more of this, and he is being that louder voice and debating things a little bit more, or having that conversation, asking those critical questions and challenging whatever it is that we're doing. Now we're thinking about it differently. So the next thing that comes up here is like, we want it to be better. So part of the change is also the bitching about it and the constant complaining about how bad it is, right? This is coming from all different angles. This is not just within law enforcement, but there's a lot of guys inside law enforcement that are complaining about how bad the training is. What are the level of tactics that we're actually using here? Where are these fundamentals at this point? And so again, with complaining comes the challenge of, well, what are you doing to fix it? And there's a lot of people having conversations about, here's some things you could do. You mentioned one of them, like Chris does. I think Chris does a really good job with this. Chris Palmer. You got Chris Curris down in South Florida. I think also does a really good job with this. Yep. And it's just, hey, use what you've got. Like, let's figure out what you've got to work with, and let's put these things together. But after you've made this huge investment, of time and money and resource into this, and now you've indoctrinated several teams as people have come through, like, this is what we do now. These are hard shifts to make, and you're not going to get, you're not going to spend 10 grand on a 2-day course or a 3-day course or whatever it is to have somebody come in and then all of a sudden this changes for you. Like, you're going to maybe learn some new things or be taught some new things, and then you're going to have to go back and you're going to have to make it work for you. So the question in all this is if you're one of those agencies or departments and you're on one of those teams and you're bitching and moaning because you don't get enough training, okay, fine. You're just not going to get it. Like, what can you do with the training that you have, or the training time and the training resources that you have? This is from my talking to guys and listening to other guys speak. Average is people get about 2 days a month for some type of training if you're on a special team or SWAT unit. Yep. Is that fair to say?
That's what I've generally come across.
So it's like 16 hours or something like that. Yeah. Maybe a month. Some guys get as many as 40, sometimes it's 20, it's whatever else. So how do you structure, with all the things that you have to do, how do you structure a program to make some effective change in there? Like, with the limited resources that you have, how would you suggest people put that together and stop bitching about it and maybe try approaching it a little bit differently?
I think they need to, you have to have the ability to step back and have an objective assessment of where you're at, right? And then assign, where do we want to be, goals? Like, what do we need to work on, right? And that team knows that, but you have to look at yourself and then identify all of the weaknesses.
You got to be real about that.
That the team has, right? And because you hear the same thing, like, well, we just don't get a lot of time, or we dedicate like one day to training, one day to shooting and one day to CQB. It's like, okay, well, let's shoot this exercise and let's see where we need to be. And I think for most guys would be like, the tactics are fine, right? Because we can have conversations about like, where are your TTPs or what you do in the house? Where is it failing, right? Are you getting people killed? Are you taking losses, operationally? When you go to application, are you not finding the suspects? Are you not getting to the house? And the answer is always, nope, it's all opposed. Stop talking about that.
Yeah, why does it always go to that though?
Because that's the easy thing. It's the unmeasurable, easy thing to train.
Got it.
Right? It's why guys tried out for it. I want the cry pants. I want the tight t-shirt. Right? That's why I'm into it. Rather than, looking at like, hey, objectively, because most of these guys on these part-time teams, like, you're a patrol officer. You're the one, you're going to do more building clearing or quote unquote CQB when you're on patrol rather than on a call out. When you find an active shooter, it's going to be patrol guys that find an active shooter, right? That are going to be the first ones to respond at least. Mm-hmm. So, if you look at Nashville, like those guys that responded, and if you watch that body cam footage, right, the right dudes got to the front quickly. They were not the first ones there, but they were the ones that knew,
running past everybody,
confidence in what they were doing. You had guys pulling up the door. He knows
that's the dude.
This ain't a fucking problem for me, dude. Right. Like, go. And they're like, will get the LPVO up there. It doesn't matter who's holding that. Right. It's not the gun that's going to solve this problem. It's the dude that went up there. And they went up there and they were committed and dedicated. And then you start to dig into this, and you talk to guys in Nashville, guys that are trained. They'll tell you, like, these dudes are serious dudes. Like, they were serious about their own growth and their own development, right? And then on that day, they were called to do something, and they delivered point of work perfectly. Right. And that's where I think most teams, if you look at it, it's not TTP training, it's not vehicle training. That's not where you're failing. Where you're failing at, you're failing on the fitness side and you're failing on the shooting side. Right. That's what you need to work on. And then learning how to like structure training correctly. Like, what are you guys doing? Are you coming out to the range shooting, or are you coming out to do training?
Elaborate on that, shooting versus training.
So I think when people, we had this kind of critique today, or just conversation, where when training is structured correctly and the cues are delivered to students at their appropriate time, and they're mentally engaged with what they're doing, they are mentally and physically exhausted after a few hours, right? But they go to the range and they're just shooting and playing gun games. They can do that all day long. Right? Shooting and training are different things. If we're trying to progress and we're trying to actually develop skill and get better, it would be the same thing like playing a sport versus training in the off season for that sport, right? It's two different things. And guys, what I find are, if you structure training correctly and you're efficient with how you set it up, the goals are really clearly articulated. This is what we're getting out of this. In a you don't have to do an 8-hour range session. In 2 or 3 hours, you can get everything you need to from that.
And be exhausted mentally.
And be exhausted. Like, there's no more gas in the tank, right? This was what we had for training, and then.
And you can evaluate it objectively.
100%.
Did we reach our goals? Did we meet our metrics for the day?
And that's another part. We talk about measuring training and measuring progress, where most teams don't want to do it, right? We've got to record it. We have to understand how to score things. We have to understand where our team standards lie. And then we have to write that down. Someone's got to be the top. Someone's got to be the bottom.
And everybody needs to see that.
Yeah. Leaderboards are a thing.
I agree.
And then
I agree.
But people will get fixated on who was first and who was last, right? And where they fell out in the stack. Where from a, development point for developing a team, I don't care who was first and who was last, right? That's going to tell you who my heavy lifters are, who my middle managers are, and who are the guys that I need to pull along, right? And you can structure that in terms of application of your TTPs any way you want. But what I'm more curious is, what's the difference between the top guy and the bottom guy, right? Because it doesn't matter what you do. We can all run a race. You look at like the top guys in the combine, right? For a 40-yard dash. Someone's going to be first, someone's going to be last. If you look at all the running backs, what's the difference between the top guy and the bottom guy, right?
Yeah.
It's hundreds of fractions of a second.
Mm-hmm.
They're all still amazing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
So,
as professionals.
Yeah, as professionals. So you look at like, how is that? Because this is the best, objective assessment of where our team is at, because we're doing team activity, where the team is at in terms of skills and ability. So now you could start to, how do we structure training to bring guys up? And what I found is like super successful in teams, you've got good guys that understand concepts. You three teach this back to everyone else. It's the watch one, do one, teach one mentality. Like true mastery is not developed until you start teaching what you know.
Yeah.
And
you have to articulate it to somebody else and understand it. So what I heard you say right up front was the fitness and the shooting piece. So all those things can all be measured objectively.
Yes.
Right. So when you're doing, and you're also saying at some level, it's a little bit of a competition, right? You're building some competition within the team because you know who the first guy is and who the last guy. Exactly. And what you're saying is what's important to you is understand what the difference is between the first and the last, but everybody's going to be measured and it's going to be public.
Yeah. Competition is great for personal development and then for team development.
Agreed.
It because it's all, get it. Someone's got to be first, someone's got to be last. Now it's like, if you're last, it's not like, we're going to kick this dude off the team. Now, he's already selected. He's already says he's going to do it. Our goal now as a team is to get everybody up to the highest level that we can get them, and it's going to be different for everyone, right? You're always going to have the heavy lifters,
right?
And you're always going to have the guys that are doing the support jobs, on that team. But identifying those can be crucial and critical for development of the entire team.
That's a leadership issue. Like knowing and like you said, not the first guy and the last guy, okay, great, got it, top and bottom. Knowing everyone in between on your team. If you are a leader, I need to know what all my guys can do and can't do.
Gotcha.
And so if I'm not doing that, why not? Why do I not know that so-and-so has an issue with a certain skill set that is required and that is lagging behind? I need to know the whole chart, all the depth chart. I need to know, okay, great, you're Mr. Wonderful, and yeah, we got to work with you. You got a short bus thing going on. But everybody in between needs to be quantified. They need to have a training jack that I can look at and go, are you getting better at this or not? And then I can talk to you about it. That takes work. And there's a lot of work that's not getting done at the leadership level, in these teams that when it is done, they progress because everyone knows what they need to work on because their team leader goes, you need to work on this. Like, and I think a lot of guys they show up and it's the minimum standard thing. The minimum standard is the most I have to do without punishment. And that's the truth. And so if you don't go that extra distance and make sure that you know all your people, all their strengths, all their weaknesses, what they need to work on, I mean, it becomes you have a team training program, and then within that you have individual training programs like, hey, Pannone, you need to work on this. Okay, this is you're lagging behind everybody else. Okay, or Matt, you're the top of the line here. You need to work with these 4 guys, like you were saying before, having the teach backs. But there's I've seen it from my perspective. There's not enough like actual leadership. There's not enough people going, I know who you all are. I know what you all can do. That's why I'm in charge of this crew, and I'm going to make us all better by figuring out what you need to work on. The stuff you did, great, nice, pat on the bum. That's awesome. We don't want to talk. It's like an AAR. You don't go to an AAR to tell, like, Scott, you were wonderful, and you're like, no, Mike, you're wonderful. Like, hey, I couldn't be wonderful if you weren't wonderful. Right. Like, stop it. What did we do wrong? Why did it happen? And how do we fix that? How do we do it better? Or how do we not make that mistake? And that takes effort. And I see a lot of people that mail it in. And that's again, it always comes back to leadership, having a vision, and then the leadership actually taking that vision and executing on it.
So you mentioned a couple of things there. One of the things was standards, the word standard, and that's going to come up here in a second. But tell me if this sucks or not, like what I'm about to say. So this week or just today, Cece finished up, and this would typically be done by about the 5th of the month, but it took a couple extra days because we had a sick kid at home. But she just finished up business meetings with all our coaches, right? So every month they get a business meeting with the staff or with CC and basically our front desk manager. They sit down and we review previous month's performance. and what the expectation is for this coming month. And metrics are measured. How many sessions did you service, right? How many renewal dollars did you bring in? How many new clients did you acquire this month? How many leads did you serve, or first workouts did you service, right? How many classes how many people were in those classes? Like, all the things are out there on the table. These are all very objective things. There's also peer evaluation, right? So there's, and it just doesn't happen all the time, but we'll run peer evaluations where, we'll ask the other coaches to, give a peer evaluation on what's going on with some objective and some subjective things there. We also send out like things to clients, right? Anonymous, surveys, just kind of reviews. Like, hey, could you just score your coach, whatever? And so self-addressed stuff, they send it back. Now, obviously, that's not all that super practical in the environments that we're talking about right now. The point of it is that's how you can actually show somebody whether or not they're doing well or not doing well, or meeting a mark or not meeting a mark. And it's very clear to them. And so it's not a weird conversation to have. And to your point, it doesn't have to be like stroking them the entire time, because they know it's coming. And if it starts that way, right, having that conversation later is a very normal part of the thing. So when you show up for a training in your 16 hours a month or whatever that you happen to get, like, if that's part of the culture and that is what we do, then everybody knows where they stand. But more importantly, it puts, to your point, Mike, and again, this is just me, I guess, coming over the top. It puts me in a position as a leader or a member of that team to help the rest of my team or even my leader do the things that need to be done in order to get better. So my question in this is, in your experience, is any of that happening anywhere? Like, when you go out there and you're working with teams, what I mean by that is like, what standards, what expectations are put in place from an objective perspective to meet marks like on fitness and on shooting?
So I think with some teams that they do have a different standard, right? And
but what is it?
They have it, right. So the guys we're training now, they have a good, like, rotating qual thing that they come up with, that the team comes up with, and they shoot it, and it all sounds really. It sounds good, from talking with Dave and how they briefed it. I'm like, hey, I get behind that. It's not a set thing. It would be like an exercise that you shoot, be like, this is now going to represent your qual for this team, right?
Okay.
And then
it's comparable skill requirements. Okay. Like, it's varied, so it's not the same thing you practice every time, but the skills within it are comparable to, being able to draw or being able to reload or being able to engage.
Oh, so you're
just
measuring
not the same format. So
gotcha.
Yeah.
So you're not trying to game that drill every time, but
right.
whatever that evaluation is going to be measures these things within it.
And I think other teams have, like, okay, hey, this is our team qual, right? But the same way that a, agency qual works, and any standard is not worth anything if you don't have the ability to enforce it.
Yeah, if you don't hold people accountable to it.
Right. And accountability is virtually zero in these agencies.
That's what I've learned too. It's been very frustrating for me to understand this.
They're union driven.
So you can't focus it, right. I abandoned the idea a long time ago that where you're going to, change an organization to have them start having accountability. The best thing that you can do is, affect people individually, and then create a environment where you're trying to build a culture within a culture.
Yep.
Right.
I totally get it.
Elite, it's the, they're like, hey, don't let the elite creep in, right? It's going to bankrupt the culture. And like, it's not. What it's going to do is you're going to have high-level performers are all going to group together.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to be in that group, guess what you got to be? You got to get on board with how they're training, what they're doing, right? It's just like-minded together. And that's how you would create, some sort of like low-key organizational change. Because you're not going to change any department's qual, right? It's never going to happen. The qual doesn't exist as a check in the box that you're trained or not trained.
CYA.
It is. It's a legal liability to do it. Now, the problem that departments need to recognize and individuals need to recognize, if you're stressed at the cover your ass legal liability thing that you have to do to keep getting paid, you're in the wrong fucking job.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Like, the qual, I have yet to see a qual that is like truly challenging in any way, shape, or form.
The qual is the minimum. A qual is the minimum, and the maximum of the absolute minimum.
Yeah.
It's the top and the bottom of the absolute bottom. People like, it is nothing. It is no indicator of any real capability. And when there's ever been one that is actually pretty challenging, it has been gotten rid of within a year.
Yeah.
Because I was in the Air Marshal program, we stood it up. They had a good qualification, the TPC, which was relatively good at the time. It's actually nothing now. Then they came up with the MEC, the Mission Evaluation course, which was actually really good. It was a genuinely good qualification course. And guess what happened? They got rid of it.
It was too hard.
Yes,
right.
It was unrealistically hard, and they got rid of it. And then now they're just mall cops with guns. Like they gutted the agency from what it was. But you can do that, but people will complain that it's unnecessary, and then it's numbers, and so just agreeing with Matt on that, you have to create a subculture of excellence, and it will pull people. The gravitational pull of squared awayness will pull you in, or it'll force you out. But you can't officially do that unless you start like all the way at the beginning, like JD and those guys are doing in a school, and you start like on the shooting piece in Phoenix, and they start really training hard, and people are getting really good, and you're growing them from the ground up,
from the bottom up.
Yeah, that's the only way, and it takes generations, because all the old FUDs have to leave, and all these people that grew up going, this is how I learned. Yeah, let's keep going. But it's you're turning around the Pacific Princess, not a Boston Whaler.
Yeah, there really has to be a commitment process to it, and what you're building along the way. You mentioned the word bankruptcy. It's the term comes to mind is you're building social currency, and that is you're building people up. Like everybody knows who the top and the bottom is. And it's okay to be at the bottom. It's not okay to stay there, right? And that we need to be moving things forward. And that, again, that club, it's everybody's job within the club. It's let's just say, it's their responsibility to help that person come up. Until which time that person shows they are not committed to doing that, and or just can't cut the mustard. Yeah. In which case the hard conversation happens, and maybe you can't be on that team anymore, or you don't get that job. You sit outside while we go do this thing, or whatever the case is. But
that's the hardest thing to do when there's no like, I hate to use this term, but no operational application requirement for the guy to be a high performer.
Okay.
Right? Because now it's like, well, he didn't meet the standard. Okay. Well, we haven't had an opposed entry or a failed operation in 30 years. Right. So does he really need to be high? Are our standards high enough? And you start having this creep of things that, not a culture of excellence, a culture of like mediocrity. Right. And because like, well, man, I like Bob. We're good friends. He's a good guy.
You rationalize poor performance. You rationalize.
And that's the hardest thing to do is look at when that culture doesn't exist, and you can't enforce anything, then you get guys that are like, hey, yeah, we know he doesn't meet the standard, but it's all right, because we'll just put him on a window. We're going to put him on the back door. And it's like, okay, if you don't understand when everything goes sideways, how important that position could be, or you're devaluing positions on the team, like that is a worse environment than creating an environment where you want guys to perform and you're holding their feet to the fire.
I'm with you 100%. Yeah, I'm with you 100%. I think that there needs to be you have to find agreement somewhere and somehow on the goals and the values. Like what are we measuring here, and why do we value it, and how do we move forward with it? But my point there is like somebody has to bring the group together, whether it's the team leader or whoever. Somebody else doesn't have to be that person. Somebody needs to execute this conversation and start doing things. So I want to come back to the standard thing. What's reasonable? Like you mentioned something there, Mike, about like, it's not the same drill every single time. But whatever the exercise is, how you explain it is, it's still measuring the fundamental pieces that
it's a component capability.
Like draw times, right? Yeah. First shot times, split times, accuracy at different distances, those kind of things.
You have to look at what the critical components are for the application of fire in your job. What do I need to be able to do? Okay, in a generic sense, and then you can take those and you can make them. There's tons of shooting drills and movement drills and all that. You can change them up and still have the same components. You look at it and go, it has the same components, the same three components that I need. I need a fast initial first shot, or I need a first 3 shots really rapidly. I need movement. I can craft that, and I can change all the targets around and still you're doing all the same things with a comparable level of difficulty and a comparable skill requirement so that it's not canned. So you're still doing something different each time. It's the skill you're working on, not the drill itself. And that's where people get stuck. And I do the same thing, and they get a level of emotional comfort, confidence. I've done this 50 times and I can do this.
So I can hear people already in the background going, so what should it be, Mike? Tell me what to do here.
So talking about the standards. So this is one thing that's interesting, right? And this is where I think a lot of times when we talk about standards, and I personally don't like the idea of standards. I think when you say this is a standard, then you put a glass ceiling on it, right? So even in the competitive world, classifiers, high hit factors keep going up. As soon as somebody crushes it, somebody shoots it better, like that gets raised over time, right? High hit factor for El Prez when I started shooting production was like 10.3, and I think now it's in the 11s, right? Because as people get better, so it's not really a standard, it's a goal that's meant to be achieved and then passed.
This actually supports your statement earlier about how, the bar gets raised as people get better.
100%.
Just with that, I mean, in comp shooting, that's how that works out.
So when you come up with like, what's a good standard? I think this is where like social media or, marketing guys that are marketing trained, like they're not doing social media is not doing any favors to this, right? So we, in a class, like we had a conversation with Shooting Pistol the other day, was like, hey, what is a good draw time? Like, just what do you think it is? And guys are like, well, no, even today we talk about what is a good presentation time? And some guys like, 0.4 seconds. And I was like, I like it. Let's test it. And I know what 0.4 seconds represents, and I start shooting it, right? And I know I can shoot, certain times pretty well. If you tell me, hey, I want you to present in 0.7 of a second, like I know what that is to shoot, and I can do it. So 0.4 and doing it, and it's nearly impossible, right? At the distance we were shooting. And I was like, so what do you think now? And when people see it, they're like, yeah, that was way fucked up. That was not correct or whatever.
They just had no frame of reference.
They have no frame of reference for it, or their frame of reference is social media.
It's somebody else told them that.
So go back, like where should my draw be? And you're like, okay, if you talk about a level 2 holster, like, sub-second. I go, I don't think you understand what it takes to get to that level. And our, law enforcement guys, do they really need a sub-second draw to do that? Or do they need, a consistent aggressive draw that may measure 1-1 or 1-2 out of a level 2 holster? Level 3 holster, you guys say, yeah, I think the goal is you want to be around 1.5 seconds, right? But that is actually pretty quick. Now, are there guys on social media that can draw from a level 3 holster in under a second? Absolutely. Sure. But the amount of work that you need to put into that.
Just to do that, right?
Yeah. So
to shave,
it becomes a
0.25 seconds. Yeah.
It becomes a circus trick. You spend a bunch of time doing a circus trick at the expense of all the other stuff that you really need to be able to do
once it's out of the holster. Yeah,
exactly.
It's out of the holster. Yeah.
For me, like I will take a 100% consistent 1.1 second draw at 7 yards over a 7/10 draw.
I've heard you say that before. Yeah. And it really resonated with me actually at Combative Summit when you were teaching. And I was like, this makes perfect sense. But sorry, to cut you off. You want to explain.
I think I value consistency of the draw over speed of the draw any day of the week. Right? Can you do it? And I've, from a few years of non-purposeful kind of incorrect dry fire training has kind of led me to that, where, I did a lot of things that I wasted a lot of time. Dry fire in a certain way because I thought it had to look a certain way based off, videos I was watching, kind of content that I was consuming at that time. It's like, well, this is what I got to do. And then understanding, is the juice worth the squeeze? And then having the opportunity, throughout my military time to shoot with the best guys in the world pretty consistently. And they all kind of had the same thing, right? Like Rob Latham said it. The first guy I ever trained with was him, and him talking about it. And Jerry Mitchell kind of echoed it. He's like, if you're drawing consistently to a 10-yard target to a guaranteed A zone in 1.3 seconds, move on to something else.
Go somewhere else.
Like, there's a lot of other things that are important, right? And nobody, from a competitive standpoint, nobody has ever won any, significant match based off their draw time. There's other elements that are purposeful. And the draw, if you build a consistent draw and you understand timing and you understand the aggression that it takes, like that's going to build over time. Don't put a lot of effort into that, right? So great, you can whip the gun out and and then the way people do it, they get the gun out. It's like, I'm going to practice my draw to first shot. And then there's a significant change when it's drawing to one shot versus drawing to five shots.
Yep.
Then it changes. So I value consistency over everything. So when we talk about standards, like how are we going to implement standards? And this is where I think the community becomes fractured. Because if you have high-level competitive guys who'll be like, well, everyone in law enforcement should be a B-class shooter. Like, okay, like that's a heavy lift, right? Anybody that shoots competitive, like what it takes to do, like just throw up one of the classifiers, have your department shoot it, a diamond cutter. It's 4 targets. Stand facing the targets, draw, shoots, 4 partial targets. It's 4 difficult shots, right? And you have everyone shoot it, figure out the hit factor, and then put that in and see where everybody would rank. I bet you that probably 0.5% would be B class, right? Because if you're not training, in a practical way, then, you're not going to understand the scoring. You're not going to understand the delivery of skills in that competitive environment.
Understood.
Right? So what is it like in terms of a standard? Like a better standard would be, let's get everybody taking a more practical approach to training. Let's see where that goes first. Before we start assigning, everyone should be an A class. Everybody should be a B class.
Understood. Yeah. So stop trying to pick something so that's like an end state you're trying to pick, like versus the process to get there.
Exactly. You're picking something that's completely arbitrary, right? And then, so let's say you do pick it. We want every officer to be a B class.
Okay.
What's the suspense date? What's going to happen if they're not?
Right. We already know the answer to this.
Yeah. The suspense date is forever and nothing.
Nothing.
So stop wasting the time assigning standards. Let's change how they train. Let's see where that gets us, right? Let's try to get guys to, level up a little bit. Hopefully that motivates them, just like working out, right? You go to the gym, you start seeing results, that motivates you to do more of the gym, right? And then it becomes habitual. You do that over time, right? And let's direct more guys to local matches, right? Hey, you might have fun doing this, right? If nothing else, they're going to love to go to a match, shoot. If you like playing with guns, if you like running around and shooting, and you get to bro out with your friends and have a good time, right? I'm not saying you need to adopt like this Death Stalker 5 days a week, 4-session a day dry fire regimen, but I think it's not unreasonable. Like, hey, can you commit? Like, can you give me 4 days a week where you're going to do 10 minutes a day?
That's not asking too much.
No.
Especially for a professional.
No.
But I understand a lot of people just want to punch in, punch out, and go home.
But even like 10 minutes, do it 10 minutes at the beginning of your shift.
Got it.
Right? That's not too long.
I know there's agencies out there that are doing that. They give people time to shoot on shift and work out on shift, depending on the person want to go.
The problem is participation. They have at Long Beach does. I know for a fact. You can come in and check out ammo anytime you want and shoot, and nobody checks out ammo.
Yeah,
it's like, I mean, not nobody, but very, very few. But something to want to kind of dive into a little bit is talk about standards, and we're talking about like being a B class or A class. That to me, I mean, and you get clarified, but it's like standards to me are something that are more specific so that we can look at the progress of the organization. I want everybody to, come out of a duty rig in level 3 in 1.5 seconds, which is completely realistic, versus something that to me is a little more amorphous. Being a B class or a C class or whatever shooter is something it's an aspirational goal for a skill level. But I look at those as being kind of different. Standards to me are like something that's very specific that we look at and say, this hard skill capability is what we would like them to be able to do on demand. And then a way to reach that, or a way that the way that we view that is to get them involved in sports shooting. And we believe that corresponds with this. But to me, it's to establish standards is in my view is more a specific goal requirement for your organization. We have these standards and we talk about them. Now they have to be enforced. If they're not enforced, they're not standards. I don't care what you call them. Okay. But we have to identify skill levels that we want these people to be at. And then we have to figure out a way to consistently get our officers to that skill level and maintain it. And that should correspond with this level of,
whatever
on-demand skill, USPSA, B class or C class or whatever you want. But I'm trying to.
Do you think though that is a byproduct of culture more than assigning a standard? Because this is where I always, and maybe I'm skewed a little bit with talking about like the unit specifically, no shooting standard.
No.
Not even one.
Really?
Nope. Zero.
Nothing.
Why don't they need it? Because the culture, right? The culture is in the mission statement and you live it, right? It's a culture. It's excellence in everything we do, right? It's like full stop. That's it.
You have to earn your way onto the team every single day.
If you're doing it right, your team leader will never say a word to you. It's like no news is good news. If I'm doing the right stuff, I'm not going to hear about it because you're supposed to do the right stuff. If I'm not doing the right stuff, I'm going to hear about it, and it's not going to be good. And so, that is a good point. But that's such a unique culture. If you could find a way to create that kind of culture of excellence, where people don't have to be told to do a certain thing. People have to be pushed to be a certain level, like overall. I mean, like that is. I think that's a great point, but I think that's a really difficult because people have to want it. I know from when I was there, I ate, slept, and drank that place. Everything I did was there. I was there on Saturday night, sitting at the freaking bar, drinking a bourbon, cleaning my stuff. I was like, I lived there. To the point where like my sergeant major was like, go home. You're a loser, do something. But that level of being driven is like, it wasn't me. I wasn't like the anomaly. I was there with 3 other dudes. Like, so it's like that culture just, it demands it internally. And I think that is something that if you could crack that is hard.
The places though that still share that culture, right? Like FBI, HRT, same way, right? There's nobody, what the amount of effort it takes to get into that, right? And what you have to do, that breeds, the excellence in an individual, right? Those guys are high level performers. All dedicated, all motivated. It doesn't fail. But there's also, you see that and they get that job. They have all of the accolades and privilege that go with that job to include an operational, an application employment that is never ending, right? And what they're doing, the way it's perceived, by everyone, kind of in the LE industry, it like that breeds the culture as well. I hear tons of officers that I know that have just recently retired that talked about when they joined the police force, right? There were 600 applicants going for 6 spots.
Right.
Now there's 6 dudes going for 600 spots. Right. So you can't to solve this whole problem, right? The quality of the applicant is significantly changed. Right. And you can't fix that, right? People are changing, like whatever. But there was a time when becoming a police officer was like, if you were a police, you were just held at a much higher level.
Yep.
Same way with a firefighter.
Yep.
And now what do we hear from people, and how do they view cops, right? They look at, and part of this is the way information is pushed out, the way that it's marketed, the way that like public opinion is skewed. It's like, oh, this is what they do. And if you look at like, I've talked with like Chris, it's like total police interaction, over a year period, it's in the millions, right? So when you talk about, well, there was this incident, and then you're talking about thousands of a percentage point, right? In terms of total police interactions, which for the most part are generally positive, but nobody likes to focus on that. We only want to focus on this one and this one. And then all of the most recent ones, you could be like, well, there's a lot of extenuating circumstances where, was something that catastrophic about what happened, or did the situation unfold and the outcome was kind of predetermined before the situation even started? So I think it's very weird, how you look at like, is it public opinion that degraded the job and the applicant pool got lower, or is it like a cultural thing?
I think it's both.
I think it is. So
I think it's both. I mean, if you don't think that you're contributing to the poor applicant pool by publicly or even, in your own circles bitching and complaining constantly about how bad it is, well, then I think you're ignorant. You're 100% contributing to this. I'm not saying you shouldn't be honest or truthful about it, but how you do that and who you're doing that with, I think is extremely, you're influencing it somehow.
Mm-hmm.
I agreed 100%.
Think about it. Do they promote the best and brightest cops to chiefs?
No.
Absolutely not. Across the board.
I've seen that already. I mean, we've seen that all the time. Man.
Across the board. And that's where I think
we're not even promoting from within anyway. We're hiring them from outside places and putting them in.
Installing them
into a culture that was probably not awesome to begin with. And in some cases, maybe it was. And this person is totally, eroded it.
I watched them pull a chief out of Richmond, California, and put him in Tucson and destroy a department.
So I think it's, saying all that, like, and I don't want to, like, honestly talk, not a cop, never been a cop. Yep. I know there's a lot of problems.
Me either, man.
But saying all that to say, like, this is why I think, coming up with, like, across the board standard, coming up with, any cultural change, abandon that idea altogether. Affect people on an individual level, light a fire, let it smolder, let it grow, right? And that's the culture within a culture, right? Groups of guys that are all connected, right? And then with influence from, obviously trying to influence certain people
from the outside,
but then it's the influence a few and let them build it up, right? That's what's going to end up fixing it or actually swaying it, rather than somebody coming in where, like, I know everybody needs to have a 1 second draw. If you don't, you're fired, or some arbitrary thing like that. It's the same thing, maybe it's a good time to guys would talk about, like, what's the 3 best drills?
Yeah. So we actually had some questions being posed by the audience. I put out on the Instagram story today. I said, hey, I just happen to be having these guys in. Is there anything you guys want to hear from them? And we had some guys hit us back, for sure. Hang tight. Let me find it here. See what we got. All right. One of these we already covered, and that was from our buddy 532 Insights. How do LEOs with limited budgets train effectively? I think you guys kind of went through that, just with how to break things down with time, but setting structure, setting expectations, and not so much having a plan going in, and also the evaluation of how that thing got actually executed.
Efficiency of training, right? And you talk about, like, we're going to be in this block, and this is, like, the subcategory of what we're doing in this block.
Right.
This is our goals. This is what we want to achieve. I also think giving guys a reasonable amount of homework, right? Things that they can do in dry fire that are going to round the edges on the initial part of the training we're going to do. Work on this, please, for the next 2 weeks. Do these drills dry. These are the assessments. These are the cues. Do this. And then when you come back, it hopefully rounds the corners. And now the beginning of the training is not actually learning new skills. It's checking off the dry fire and then enhancing those skills with reps.
I think when guys have limited, they have limited resources.
Yeah.
We don't have this much ammo. I know from, like, running CQB warm up, the first couple times I did CQB warm up, I did it completely dry. I didn't do a single bullet. I dry fired the whole thing, so I understood what the yard lines were and all that. I think stuff like that, they can get a ton of yardage out of. They can get a ton of work out of it, even at an institutional level. Come in, and if they've got limited resources, come in and actually have a structured, dry fire sequence that you do, and then once you're done doing that, then you do it live. But you're maximizing the benefit of the live ammo.
Yeah, so that's a really good. So this guy, Minuteman CZ, poses a question. Says, you have 100, 200 rounds of, max per week for the pistol. What do you train? And so part of what you just said there makes sense to me.
Yeah.
If you're trying to train a team and you have very little ammo, like, you could give them pre-homework. This is what we're gonna do, right? We only have 100 or 200 rounds to do. So do this through your dry fire so that when you come out, you're at least prepared for that, right? And then we can measure, effectiveness or efficiency there. But, again, this is for the pistol. What do you train? What would you focus on?
If you have 200 rounds a week to shoot, you are doing better than 90% of the people that own guns.
This says you only have. Yeah.
Well, that's great. If you have 200 rounds, like, okay, so if we talk about weekly percentages, right? I would I would probably commit half of those rounds to marksmanship, and the marksmanship would be at speed in the form of doubles and practical accuracy drill, right? And understanding predictive and reactive shooting. That would, for me, that would represent 50% of the rounds. 20% of the rounds would be dedicated to movement, right? Moving and shooting, position entry, position exit, right? Moving aggressively, up range, down range, handling the gun the whole time.
Love that.
Right. And then with that movement thing and across the theme of any of the blocks, there's a gun handling element in there, right? I want to draw and reload as much as I can. Right?
Okay. Yeah. So you're working that into those sections.
Working that into it. It doesn't have to be high volume stuff, right? So movement would be that. And then I would say, you know, another 10% would be, or excuse me, that was 20%. Another 20% would be like kind of niche specific things that were to what I wanted to work on, right? If it's concealed carry, if it's defensive, if it's scenario based things like, hey, this is what I would see the application looks like, I would commit 20% of the rounds to that. And then I would commit 10% of the rounds to checking what I'm doing in dry fire, right? It would be like, oh, I've been, want my bill drill time to get up. I've been checking it bill. Okay, I'm going to commit 40 rounds of that 200 rounds
to the bill drill,
to checking whatever I'm doing in dry fire. Check my gun handling, right? If it's 4 aces or that, some of those smaller ones, things that if I'm a USPSA shooter, it's going to be those skills, right? And then the reoccurring theme in everything is obviously a marksmanship component. I'm going to have a dedicated block where I'm working on marksmanship, right? Predictive and reactive shooting, stressing foundational skills and fixing those foundational skills. And then everything else will be the application of that with movement, you know, isolated drills. And I think the sky's the limit in terms of creativity. It's how creative can you be with setting up your training? But people want like, well, where do I put the targets? It doesn't really matter.
I would add one thing in because I would probably do it slightly different here or there because we're not the same person. But
I love that.
The concepts are all the same. I would be doing the same components, maybe a little that's immaterial. I would not be doing it at 7 to 10 yards. I would be pushing it. If I've only got that much, I've got to see at distance what I'm capable of doing because everything else is going to be easier. People will want to go where they're comfortable. They're going to want to shoot that little tiny group. And it's like, they need to understand that if I'm training, it's not going to be pretty. My goal is to push, to ride the fringe of the failure point. I want to be at the edge of control in a lot of that stuff to see where it breaks apart. And I think that's going to be a part too. That if you're doing that at 7 to 10 yards, you're not getting what you can get out of it.
So funny you just brought that up because I was just having a conversation with, we started the thing talking about, you know, the time that you guys put into responding to questions and answers and hence the live and why that's important because you can put a lot of energy into it and reach a lot of people. But I was talking to Mike the other day and just talking about my nemesis. And it's always been like this. And it's the 15. It's the 15. 20, 25, I'm good. 10, 7, 5, 3, I'm good. The fucking 15 every time for me. I don't know what it's like in my head, but going back to like practicing it at distance. And it's not that I spend all the time at the 7 and the 10. Like last time I was at the range on my own, it was all at the 15. I'm like, but then I went out. This was on the indoor range. Then I was out at this course the other day. As soon as we got to the 15, shit broke down again. Like it always gets me. I don't know what it is.
I think that I mean, not your specific instance, but I think for a lot of people that distance is an emotional thing more than a skill thing. It's they get to, you say 25 and they go, and they
just saying the 15s makes the hair stand up on my arms right now.
But once they conquer that, then it's not like it's not even a thing. I don't view distance the way they view distance. It's just, it requires more accountability in a certain area and more precision in a certain area, but it's still the same target. But there's an emotional component. If you don't ever get outside of that except 10. On the rare occasion, then all of a sudden it becomes problematic. And it begs to talk about the people that, you know, that within the law enforcement community that understand it and they shoot at distance, and the ones that justify not shooting at distance because statistically you'll probably never get an engagement at more than, what is it, like 3 yards and 2 seconds and you won't. Statistically you won't until you are, and then you won't be able to handle it.
I'll tell you, if you put concerted effort into training and you get to where you can hold 90% alphas shooting doubles at 20 yards, 10 yards and 12 yards is not going to be a big deal to you. Right. And that's where I think guys obviously you don't start there, but it's like, you know, I would, you know, talking with, you know, training with my sons, it's like, hey, this will be the goal. You want to go through, here's an accuracy standard, right? 7-yard doubles, right? You want to go through the 6 iterations of 8. You want 48 rounds where you're holding all alphas. You hold all alphas, go back to 10, right? If you're holding all alphas as fast as you can pull the trigger, the same, course of fire for doubles. The boys really understand doubles, very well. You're holding 48 rounds in all alphas. Now we're going to 12, right? And where it breaks, that becomes the start point for your next
the
session.
next goal, right? For the next thing. Yeah, totally get that. That makes perfect sense. And then, I mean, would you say that like once you've like mastered that, then it's 5 rounds at all of those distances, and
it's fitness.
Yeah,
it's
right.
Like,
exactly.
I can lift more weight, so I'll lift more weight. Now I'm getting stronger. I lift more weight.
What's the
it's
intensity modifier?
Yeah, exactly.
I've shot a lot of doubles, and I still use it, as a huge training tool. It's a big part of my training. But I'm starting more and more over the last, year and a half. Is if I want to really stress my grip, I'm going to just add a 3rd round. And I'm going to shoot a predictive triple, because what I'll see is I'm going to get the same 2 tight ones, and then I see the mistake on the 3rd round right now. And it's not at 7 yards. I'm not shooting that at 7 and 10. Like, I'm doing the bulk of my pistol training now, honestly, for me, 17, 18, like 22 weird yard lines because of mental blocks, right? It's like, no, not 20. If I shoot 22, I don't know, it's 4% better, right?
No, it's math, bro. It's math.
So it's
that whole doubles thing. I think people, I know you explain it every time, everything you teach, I explain it. It's a diagnostic tool.
Yep.
But it's like, it tells you about your equipment. It tells you about your shooting. When I shoot doubles with a 43X, it's different than shooting doubles with a Glock 17. It's like, it tells me different things about how I have to hold that unique gun. There's so much information in it. And as soon as you get that success, like you said, you just keep backing up, and you're still getting more information. You're just getting more refined information. It's like, it doesn't end. Like, if I could shoot doubles with a 43X at 50 and actually hit something, I would.
Right.
Just because I'm going to learn something that I didn't even know I didn't know. I think that's the understanding of the marksmanship piece as a sliding scale that never ends, just goes to infinity. That's the kind of the mindset or mentality, actually. That's the kind of mentality that's going to get people to investigate what their weaknesses are more.
So it just goes back to like the minimum round counter that you might have. It's not like you're not burning down a bill drill and trying to increase your time in a bill drill. You're getting diagnostic feedback at 15, 20, 25 yards with two rounds.
So that's the biggest thing. Like, and Mike kind of hit on it, where it's a lot of people I will hear, they talk about doubles and that's kind of gained popularity, but they're well, how many alphas? You're looking at the outcome of it.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't care. You're missing the point of what you're trying to fix, right? If you're looking at it from a purely competitive standpoint, right? USPSA, that is the engagement strategy. Then we can talk about, all right, well, I want to hold, but you won't like it, right? You won't like where you need to be. There's going to be 100% alphas, in my opinion, at 7, 10, and 15, right? And then it starts to degrade at 20, because that is what's possible, right? So that's the goal. Right? What's acceptable? Well, I don't know. Send me a video of you shooting doubles.
Right.
Let me see it. Like, I think you need to move to 5 yards and start working this out. Because there's, everybody's going to be at a different
There's
point.
levels. Yeah.
Yeah. There is levels to it. Yeah. But when you use it as like a diagnostic tool, which is what I personally like it for, it is the engagement strategy for that. You're going to learn more about understanding, tying cause and effect. I felt this happen. The dot showed me it happened visually. The target confirmed it. Right?
And that's where exactly I saw where that happened, and I know what I did.
Yeah.
Or I know what I didn't do.
Yeah. You either know what you did, you know what you didn't do, but you know how it broke. And now the only question is, like, do you understand the correction? Right. And if you do, apply it. Right. I always talk about in training, like, I don't care how many mistakes people make. I care about the mistakes you made that you didn't recognize.
That you didn't learn from.
Yeah, let alone learn from it. But you didn't even know, like, you come up to the target and you're like, oh, I fucking didn't know that one was up there. It's like, okay, well, it's a different conversation. Like, now we look at, like, what are you looking at? How engaged are you? Like cognitively, like, are you thinking about what's happening? And a lot of people, I think it's almost like just white noise. Like, how'd that go? I don't know.
Yeah.
Well,
then you're wasting ammo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And your time.
You're not connected to the exercise mentally. You're not.
People that buy ammo right, that buy their own ammo to shoot don't have that problem.
Yeah, no, not at 38 cents a round. We're shooting, guys are shooting doubles today. There's some guys shooting, like, had a lot in the A zone, and then they had just some random stuff peppered all over the place. And I'm like, okay.
What happened here?
Yeah, it's like, okay, got it. That's you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be pushing
yourself.
And I just looked at it and said, these ones are in the A zone. That's what you want. If you can do it that many times, you can do it every time. Now we got to figure out why those happen, when they happen, what caused that to happen. So it's not like that's bad. There's value in that. That's information that you can use if you understand how to use it.
Yeah.
Like, I know I can do this consistently, but not consistently enough. Let's fix this. And I think that type of, like, the desire to get information. Every bullet you shoot down range is information you send out. And then where it lands, it's telling you if it was the information you thought you sent or not. And so it's like, you got to be, if you just throw it down there and you're not connected, you're literally wasting bullets. You're getting no information. You're going to have a really difficult time getting better. But that's the mental connection and dedication to it. You've got to be disciplined.
Yeah. So an interesting part about that is, like you're saying, like, you have all these shots on, in the A, and then you got a few that are outside, and that people will focus on, oh shit, I missed all of these ones on the outside, versus like, no, go back to focusing on how you got all those shots in there and do that more. Not worry about these.
If you can do it with that many,
if
you can do it with that many, you can do it with all of them. Just figure out how to clean that rest of it up. That's telling you, both things are telling you. One is telling you you're capable of doing this, and the other part is telling you there are still some flaws in this and you need to identify them. But I think that part of it, the way that you mentally process your own targets is an important part. People look at it and they go, oh, the first thing, oh shit, I got one over here. Who cares?
If you're doing that, what you end up doing is spending less ammo doing that, because you are doing maybe a string of 5 doubles, right? And then it's walking down to the target or pulling the target back to you if you're on an indoor deal or whatever else. And you should be going, and it slows the pace down. It slows and I'm not saying slow your shooting down. I'm saying it slows the pace of how fast
the pace of training.
The pace of training.
And we experienced this when doing classes when ammo was very hard to come by, right? Or it was very expensive. It was hard to get. And I know what I started doing, Ben started doing. I think you just incorporating more dry fire into the training, and that was something that I would always separate. Like, dry firing was something I did at home, and when I went to the range, shooting on the range. What I found is, like, when I'm out there training myself, there's huge value in dry firing, like having a significant amount of dry fire while I'm actually training, right? To understand what's happening, kind of see, what I want to do, and then kind of checking it in real time. Like, it's a benefit for me.
So I think what I hear you saying there is you're dry firing and you're moving immediately to the live fire to see how it's connecting, versus if you're at home in your garage or wherever you're happening to be dry firing, you're not actually getting to see, like, you think you're doing well, right, through the dry fire practice or whatever, but you're not actually getting to see the outcome of that. So when you go to the range, you can check that, is what you're saying.
You can check it, right? You could set up, hey, I have limited rounds.
I never thought about that.
Now I can be, I'm on the range. I'm going to run this, 15 times. 15 times dry. I'm going to shoot it 5 times. Now I'm going to run it 15 more times, right? And change the order up. Now I'm going to shoot that, right? And you're balancing dry and live. And it's the same thing we did in classes then, where now it's a benefit in the class now, to where I do dry fire blocks in class. One, to help guys, develop that skill, but to give them an understanding, like, this is the pace that dry fire training happens at. Because I think a lot of people look at dry fire wrong, right? Or they're training, they're not training or all the things or getting the benefit out of it that they could, right? Most people are like, well, what are you doing in dry fire? Do draws and reloads.
It's the same in fitness, man. Like, just coming in, you're kind of going through motions, and I'm going to go use that machine over there today. Really? Why? Why are you doing that? Like, what effort are you putting into that?
Because I think the dry fire.
I love tricep pushdown.
the dry fire stuff on the range. What I saw as well was people could actually see when they were doing certain things, how the gun was performing with no recoil, because because it was what they were doing to the gun. When they would move into position and set up, does the gun dip? How does it move? Because a lot of that gets masked in recoil. They don't know as they're moving, or if they're shooting on the move, they're dry firing while they're moving. You can see if you're putting input on that gun. If you're looking at the dot, you're gonna track with, like, there's a bunch of stuff that it actually I didn't realize it would help as much as it did, because it takes away the masking effect of the gun actually discharging, and they're not really sure what they see. And now when they do it in dry fire, like, oh, that's what happened when I basically slide into position.
It makes sense that I'm pushing that gun and it's going like down and to the left, or
they get
whatever.
to see that. And like Matt said, now this pays the pace you're looking at. You're trying to, the way I articulate is like, you're trying to shoot as fast as you can see. I'm trying to look at things and just shoot them immediately. I'm never going to be able to catch my vision, but I'm always going to be trying.
Right.
And so it's like, this gives them the ability, because there's no recoil to manage. You can damn near shoot as fast as you can see. And so it's now how fast can you move the gun? How fast can you see? Because the vision's going to drive that. So that dry fire part, because it was, in all honesty, I was putting it in there because I'm like, we don't have the ammo. Like, we have to do this, and there's still value in it. But I started to see more and more value, and it changed the way I viewed dry fire for that reason.
I love that. It's super smart. I hadn't considered that, because I've always separated it. It's always been two different things. Going back to the doubles piece, that is really all I've trained probably in the last several months, because my training has been a little bit broken. I haven't been quite on my game, but going in there, it tells me so much, and I can have 100 rounds and get so much value out of just that drill, or that exercise. I call it an exercise, not a drill.
Yeah,
it is. And I think it's it's a huge benefit, right? And I think guys need to, go back and revisit it, right? I think a lot of guys need to go back and visit like Ben's book and, read the explanation of it, right? Because it was created for a certain, specific reasons, and there's specific outcomes that you're trying to achieve with it. And it's very process oriented for me. Even when I first heard about it, and Ben presented, he brought it to the unit. We talked to him. It's like, hey, how important is this drill? And he was like, at that time, he's winning everything. Like, that's his business, is winning. And he's like, in the last year, I've shot 60,000 rounds of this year. That was 60,000 rounds of this drill. That was enough for us. We're like, we got to look at
this. Exactly.
Like, what?
Okay.
What are we getting for? Like, that's okay. That's a lot that you're committing to that. So
there's just, I mean, I can't say enough. There's so much information that you get from it if you're aware. There's information about your shooting, about your grip, about your target focus, about your gun. If you change something, about the optics that you like or don't like, your trigger, like there's so much information there that it's almost hard to like catalog all of it. And it's like an indispensable tool if you are mentally there. That's the key. It's like, I've said it, I've taken Vetty out and she shot doubles and stuff. And I'm like, the whole shoot 4 pairs and stop.
Yep.
Or it becomes a timing drill. It's 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. I need to refinish my deck. 1, 2. How's my bass boat? 1, 2.
Right.
Like, if you're not, you have to be there the whole time, 100%. And if you're not, just stop. But it's like, there's so much information that comes back from 8 rounds that you can work with, that it becomes almost overwhelming in the amount of focus that's required.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, and that's why my training went there, because I realized I was getting so much more out of that in terms of like what's happening with my grip on the third time, right? Not just the first time and the second time, and what's going on with where's that dot actually going, now? Because by the time I get to that fourth double, it's like, I don't even know what I just saw right there.
I think it's invaluable. I get asked a lot, like, for newer shooters, like, do you do this or do that? And like with my sons, it's like, nope, put them on doubles. Like, the first shots, this is the drill we're shooting, right? And what you learn from it and how much it can, change the learning curve. Right. Because you're actually fixing like one of the number one skills that people will. I mean, how many times have you heard guys in years past where they're like, oh, I'm shooting all the time. I'm shooting. Yeah, but my grip is shit. Oh, well, here's one thing. Here's something you can do
right.
that is going to fix this for you.
Dry fire is not going to fix that for you, right? Like, I mean, not in this context. All right, let's do a couple more here. All right, and we'll get out of here. I got to get you guys some food.
Tacos.
I think we answered this one. Basically, I'm going to ask it because I think it's something that comes up, goes back to you're asking for the answers so that you don't make a mistake, right? Versus going out and exploring things and maybe making some mistakes and figuring it out on your own. But I still like the question. Tier 1 Bacon asked, what 3 firearms drills for an agency in-service training? Like top 3 firearms drills.
So it goes back to the immediate question, like, what do you want to improve on?
Yeah.
Right.
To identify skill requirement.
And if you say like, hey, we want to improve on transitions, designated target. We want to improve on, draws and aggressive, being able to shoot aggressively, Bills drill, right? But it's like, you can't say that, like, what are the 3 ones for in-service training?
Yep.
There's too many. That question leads to 5 more questions, right? Like, well, what's the common level of training?
Start higher level, right?
Yeah.
Like, what are we trying to get accomplished here?
Exactly. That's what is your end state goal? Like, what do you want to work on? That has to start the conversation. Not what's the drill, and then because it should be skill driven, not drill driven. It shouldn't be like, I want to do this drill because it's a good drill. It should be, this is a skill I need to work on. What drill will help me refine that?
Yeah.
And then change it a bunch. So
Could
you're
be
not
a
doing
lot,
the same
like,
thing.
I would say, hey, if you want to have a very challenging in-service training, right, you're not going to like this answer, right? The 100 to 10 rundown, that's a great one for cops, right?
Yeah.
If you don't want anyone to ever show back up at another in-service training, run that drill.
Yeah, so the 100 to 10, for those people that don't know, is you're starting at 100 yards from the target.
No, you're starting from 110 yards.
110 yards.
And you're running to the 10-yard line.
So you're running 100 yards.
You're running 100 yards.
And then what's the course of fire?
And then you're shooting 10 rounds.
10 rounds for time.
10 rounds in the A zone.
In the A
right?
zone for
the
time.
whole thing for time, ideally want to get that done in under 20 seconds.
Nobody's coming back, bro.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
How many blown out hamstrings
but
and heart attacks do we have?
Think of
before
that
they even get to
They're just going to keep running into the parking lot and drive away.
In terms of application for what, like there is more body cam footage of that drill being executed in real life.
Time, yeah.
Right. And it doesn't need to be 100, run it from 50.
Yeah. I get what you're saying there, yeah.
That one's good. I like, in-service training, bill drill rundown is good. But there'll be a reoccurring theme. Like if you just have a limited amount of time, we want to get aggressive gun handling, aggressive shooting.
Movement.
Right. And movement. Right. And then it's got to be done kind of linear, like lateral movements too hard to do.
Yep.
With in-service training, but
efficiencies,
you can have these lanes and run these drills, right? And then, maybe you have put a fun drill in there, right? Like MXD is fun, Blake drills is really fun, but I think if you just ran like the bill drill rundown, like, hey, you're going to shoot a 25-yard bill drill, we're going to time it, we're going to measure that. You're going to shoot a 10-yard bill drill, static, we're going to time it, we're going to measure that. Then you're going to shoot a 5-yard bill drill, time it, measure that. We're going to figure out the hit factor on all 3 of those. Now you're going to run the bill drill rundown for hit factor. We're going to combine on that average hit factor. Think of the cross section of data set that you're getting from that one exercise.
If you're doing it that way, and that's the goal, or that would be the goal, is to collect up that information and then actually do something with it, not just show up and, your time was, and you move on to the next person your time was. This goes back to what you were saying in terms of this was the top guy, this was the bottom guy. That doesn't mean the bottom guy is the worst guy. It just means this is where we were today.
Yep.
How do we improve on these things? But yes, when it comes to metrics and the data that you can pull together from that, like you learn a lot of stuff. You learn stuff about fitness, learn stuff about all kinds of things.
Yeah. Hey, you're super accurate. You're kind of slow.
You're slow.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's work on that. Right. This can feed into this, but your accuracy is fine. We can always make it better. You learn how to run it, more aggressively. Let me steal some time, and shoot a little more aggressively, and that'll help your hit factors out. But learning how to balance it. But you could have a remarkable amount of information from one simple exercise that at least you could hand it to the officer and be like, this is what you need. This is what I would do if I were you.
100%.
They could crumble it up and put it in the trunk of their car and just go about their day.
If that's what they want. Okay, last one. And I'll ask this one. This is on target azimuth. I asked, how would you explain to a mill commander or like a team commander that performance shooting is beneficial to his unit? So I think I want to wrap up on that one just because we've talked about all these things that could be really great and a lot of things about culture and how to change things and measure things and all this stuff. But a lot of the I don't want to say it's an excuse, but a lot of the roadblocks we hear about is leadership just doesn't think this is important, and this is the problem.
They don't even understand what it is. That's the problem. It is the effective delivery of kinetic energy. That's what it is. That's what hit factor is. It's points divided by time. It's points per second, which is kinetic energy per second. Kinetic energy is the mill side. Okay. So I want to be able to deliver effective fire, which is kinetic energy, to the target as rapidly and as effectively as possible with as little waste as possible. I don't want to waste ammunition of any kind, whatever munitions you're using. But you say, I can get more energy on target to neutralize that target faster using this type of shooting. It's a math problem. If you present it as I can get the job that you want me to do, I can get it done better and faster and more efficiently using this technique, and I can show it to you. Then that's the way you've got to present it, because that's where we were at. That's why we use hit factor. It is the everything closer to the center is worth more points because it's more effective. It's more effective delivery of energy. Again, hit factor is points per second or energy per second. You can, whichever the application is. Once you present it that way, and I know guys that are in the Marine Corps marksmanship team, and they present that to commanders that way. And the Marine Corps has a shooting competition that they have and all that, because they're realizing, yeah, that's what we want. What you want, take the game words out of it and the game and all that. All it is a math problem. And this math problem works better using this technique. To me, I think that is they want something that they could brief to hire as well. And so you've got to do it.
That's where I think that, like, I agree with all of that. Like, that is the explanation, but like the question talking about how do you present it to a commander, you tie it, the same way that we put all this effort into human performance over longevity, or human performance for longevity, understanding, hey, this is going to make the guy better over time. It's going to give him better awareness of how to train correctly and all that. You tie that, you'd have to explain that to the commander, where I'm not going to talk about like that can go right over his head, right? That's company commander stuff. That's the guys that are going to deliver this. But in terms of like, let's talk about developing soldiers, developing Marines, developing our operators, right? Making them more capable, more efficient with their weapon systems, a better understanding of how to train so that they are able, when they're NCOs and they're small unit leaders, they're going to pass that down, right? This one thing that we implement can create a cultural change over time if we resource it correctly and we execute it correctly. Like, that's how I would explain it to a commander. And then like, that's the BC gets that. The guy that's going to control the purse strings and make that training happen gets that. Then the company commander is like, all right, come here, dummy. Let's talk about hit factor, right? Get all your platoon commanders in here. Like, this is how we're going to, and you explain it one way to the platoon commanders and that of how the training is going to be executed. And then you go to the platoon sergeants and you explain it one way to them, right? And each level you go down, it gets more in depth. To the actual squad leaders running the line, those are the ones that get that highly technical thing about points per time, and then maybe the company commanders, it's kinetic energy, right? But I think the initial thing to get them to buy off on it, it's all like the training that we would do just to become a well-rounded operator. It had nothing to do with the job, you know what I mean, per se, but it was like, we're doing this, I don't need to know how to drive race cars, but being a very good driver is going to help me, when I have to drive, right, in a low-vis environment or whatever. The same, you have to try to tie that training into, and I know the on-target azimuth guy kind of what his job is, but you have to sell it as like, this is a longevity thing. This is how we're going to train people now. This is the buy-in and this is the trickle down. This is how it's going to train privates in the future, specialists in the future, right? And we put that initial investment in, it's going to pay dividends down the road.
So I think what I heard you guys both do is what you did there was it's how you simplify the explanation as you go through the different levels, or add complexity to it depending on obviously the target audience that you have in front of you, right? And what you're trying to get across from, or what they actually need to do, and what level do they actually need to understand this. At some point, you're going to have to show a result, right? But it seems to me like that's being adopted anyways, because they're bringing guys in from the outside to teach people how to do things that they don't necessarily do. You guys are a great example of that. Like, you're not cops, but you're teaching cops, right? Or my buddy Scott at Veracity Solutions hadn't ever been an operator, but he was coming in from the AMU to go teach people, the distance shooting game or whatever, all these different units. And he may have gotten some pushback at one point from somebody, you've never done the job, so how would you know? And he goes, look, my job is to teach your guys how to shoot people in the face better. And that's my job. And if you just let me do some things here, I will show you how that turns out, kind of thing. And that's how he was talking to the guy at the top who came up and kind of questioned him. And then was able to do his thing, and then he talked to the guys he was training about all the things that they need to know technically in order to be able to do that.
When you hire somebody who's like he has the technical skill that you want, right? And the high level units do this all the time. You're not like, if you default to, if he goes in and you default to, well, you've never done the job. I didn't call you guys to come train you. You called me. Like, if this skill resided in this building, you wouldn't call me. Right. I'm not talking about doing your job. I'm going to tell you now how to take this long range rifle and make the bullets go exactly where you want them to go. Mm-hmm. But let's not forget about who called who.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's where I think that becomes like, maybe on that part with your friend, that's an ego thing, right? Or because it's like, hey, you do something much better than I do it. Now I'm scared of you and I hate you for it, and I'm going to give you the right response. Where I think from our world, we were opposite of that, where it's like, I need this skill. Who's the best guy at this? Let's hire him. Let's call him and see if he likes money.
Yeah, dude, big dirt bike riders from South Africa. Whatever. Yeah, we did. But back to what we were talking about on the briefing, because I did what we're talking about. I briefed battalion commanders in the 82nd when we did that. Okay. When I came back from Iraq in 05, and then in 06, I was in AWG. We were training them. We briefed BCs. I didn't go to the level you're talking about, like the Puzzle Palace level, but battalion commanders and below, because we briefed company commanders, and then the battalion commander, guy Colonel Kim, came down. He's like, I want to hear about this. We briefed him. It's a one-off, so it's a sample set of one. He totally got it and understood it. I don't know who briefed it above that level, so I don't know. Like, what he says makes perfect sense, because there's got to be a forward-looking that isn't technical, that gives them a big picture. Hey, we're going to make guys better, human performance. I don't disagree with that. I'm just saying, I briefed the battalion commander and he totally got it and understood it. And those guys were getting ready to rotate right into combat. But I do give a lot of credence to what you're saying. At the I don't know, the strategic level or whatever, they have to hear a long range vision. Like, listen, this is going to change a culture. This is going to be something that's beneficial down the road not for the math problem, but for you as the guy in charge of it. It's going to make your guys make you look better effectively. But he understood at that level. Like I said, I never briefed it above that. He was the highest guy that I briefed on it.
Yeah, so this is like in law enforcement in particular, I hear that like there's many trees on the branch, there's many branches on the tree. Mm-hmm. And the first one you go to might not get it, might not agree. There's another one to go to. You need to know how to talk to that person and have those conversations, and how do they need to have that message delivered? Do they need to feel like it was kind of their idea? When it gets presented to the next person, well, fucking figure that out. Get them to feel like it's their idea, or whatever.
If that's what gets it across the line. Yeah. And we did. And like I said, it's uncanny, actually. The way we briefed it at the different levels was different level of detail. We got to squad leaders. It was, you're going to be responsible for this training.
Yeah, so somebody has to champion this.
What you were saying, I actually did to a certain point. I didn't do it completely. But what he was talking about is what we actually did in AWG, and it was super successful at those levels. It just didn't. I think it went to TRADOC and died, honestly. I think it went there and somebody just like, whatever, I don't care. The old qual works great or whatever. But the levels that we briefed it to got it, and it made sense to them. So I think that's finding a strategy, whatever it is, not whether it's what Matt's talking about, or for he's asking how to get that in. You've got to understand the culture and what the culture wants to hear. You have to tell them what they want to hear to get buy-in. Yeah. Otherwise, it just doesn't. And it doesn't matter how good the explanation is. If my explanation is not good enough, then it's not good enough. It is what it is. So you've got to figure out within your culture.
Gotta ask questions.
Yeah. What do you want to hear me tell you when in regards to this? Like, what are the words you need to hear that will make you feel good about accepting this? Yeah. And it's like, I think that's. There's some guys that I could do that with safety stuff. I could always do stuff that was considered unsafe and get exception to policies. I just had a knack for it. That's one of those things that you just have to be able to do. And I think knowing your own culture is going to be the crucial.
Yeah, so you might have to ask some questions. You might have to do some interviewing with some people to understand who you'd be talking to and what does that person need to feel.
Again, back to what we said before. Ask questions first. What do we need?
Got it. I appreciate you guys entertaining that. A lot of the other questions we got were covered. Basically the content of the subject matter was covered in a lot of the other conversation, which went a lot of different directions, which was very cool for me. having you guys both sitting here and entertaining that, and then kind of listening to the back and forth, a little bit of debates at some points. But the cool part about this for me is kind of where it started for me a long time ago, and kind of where it is now, and being able to just sit here and have a conversation with you about some of these concepts, right? Whereas before, I was just trying to get the pieces of the information. When I go like sort of back to my beginning of my journey 5-ish years ago, kind of in this space, now I understand the concepts. You guys helped me understand. You guys are two of the guys that helped me understand what those concepts are and how to ask the right questions, not to get to a specific answer, just to get to the next point so that I could get to the answer that I needed for me for the different things that I've explored over time. That's super cool to me, and I really appreciate you dudes. I do.
Thank you, man. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, same here.
So, this is again, I said this at the beginning, like the fact that both of you guys are sitting at the table here, given where I kind of started in this whole thing, and then just started kind of on the internet while, just kind of randomly looking around for who's talking about things and what are they talking about and what are other people saying and whatnot. You guys have always been sort of a northern, kind of star for me to kind of go to in a lot of ways. And part of that is just, the relationship building, and you guys, I can always ask like, hey, there's this guy over here, he's saying these things. What do you think? Whatever, and giving me objective feedback. I mentioned, the time that you guys take. Like Mike sent me like a 2-minute video the other day that he made specifically for me on a question that I had about something specific. And I know I'm not the only guy, but I just want to acknowledge, guys, I feel super cool. It feels super good to have you guys here and take the time out to spend with me. So I just want to say it publicly.
Oh, my pleasure, man.
Yeah, same here, man.
This has been great.
Yeah. So a couple things. First off, Mike, I see a lot of stuff, from you just basically on the range and practicing. You and Betty out there a lot.
Yeah.
You guys going out there and spending time. And Matt, you're kind of, you're back in the game on the Instagram thing, and it seems you're doing what Matt always does, which is put up training videos and try to provide value for people. You guys both do the same thing. Anything exciting we can expect from you guys? Anything you guys can talk about coming down the pipe, or is it if I told you I'd have to kill you kind of thing?
No, not for me. I'm gonna get real heavy into the micro stuff. I'm gonna start pushing hard. My goal is to do the stuff that we do with full size guns with micros, just to do it, because I know there's so many out there, and I know there's a lot to be learned from that. I'm gonna learn a bunch of stuff that I don't even know I don't know yet, and I'm gonna push the capability of that, because I think it's hugely important. I don't think I know it's hugely important, because there's freaking millions of those guns out there, and only a handful of people can shoot them worth a damn.
Yeah,
and nobody trains on them.
Nobody's really talking about it if they are. Yeah. So except for you, so I would. You've been tremendously helpful on that end for me too, because you know what I carry, and it's one of those. How about you, Matt?
No, I'm continue working and training. I'm figuring out a way, like kind of reshape my website to have an area there. I'm gonna start hosting like longer content videos, more in-depth training stuff.
Very cool.
Just for people to be available. Kind of, it started with the idea. I think I see the gun space on social media, right? There's going to come a time where it's just too hard to get anything out to reach new people.
It's the fitness world, man. It's the same thing. It is getting there. Yeah.
Was it just getting clogged up with too much trash?
It's just it's so much traffic, period. And then the next thing is like, well, how much is good versus how much is bad? How are we weighing that? I mean, there's just so much of it out there. And I think for a long time, people were like, going back to, I think we were talking about like shadow banning and things like that. I kind of saw that coming, because with what has happened over the last couple of years. And it's interesting kind of some of the things we're seeing with what Meta seems to be doing. And they say they're going to stop fact checking the way they were fact checking and maybe change some things and whatnot. I think I see a lot of people blame shadow banning for why they're not growing their following, or why they're not out there, maybe building their businesses. And a lot of times I just go, okay, well, there's definitely some of that going on. I mean, we know that. But I think sometimes it's like, well, actually, your content kind of sucks, and you're also an asshole. So there's that. And then there's also there's so many new people coming onto the scene, and there's always a new way of getting your stuff being put in front of other people. And so I hear what you're saying.
I think for
give them a direct pathway to hear you if they want to hear you.
For a lot of people, the there's no content in their content.
That's what I mean.
There's no nutritional value, bro.
And if they're not getting what they want out of it, they're not getting their emotional button. They're being shadow banned.
I have no complaints with the growth. I know I get it. I'm shadow banned. Nothing can be shared or whatever, but I'm still continue to grow on that platform. Even after I had a lot of growth out there, and then, went through the process with them, like, hey, everybody that hasn't had engagement, like, get rid of that. And there's different settings I found out, on the professional accounts where you can just mask, like, nope, those are not real accounts. Like, get rid of that or get rid of whatever. And I still get a ton of messages from, like, oh, wow, this account was created today. And you have no, following one or whatever. Like, okay, hold on. Let me guess which company this is that's hitting me up. But even with that, like, I'm still reaching over 1 million people a month, based off my dashboard stuff. So I don't have any issues with that. I just think there's going to come a time where now, like everybody's experience, so like the account, boom, it's gone. And then there's nothing if you don't have something to shift over to.
It's real.
To be able to,
so smart.
Still have, because for me, it's not about creating, as a matter of fact, like, I hate content, right? There's no media team. It's my phone and me and some bad words, right? So
profanity,
but I try to keep it, hey, this is what I'm working on now. The explanations, like, and I get hit a lot where you're not training enough civilians or whatever. Like, I'm trying to constantly put stuff out for free, right? To where there's your training, right? There's complete class dumps on there. That's the same thing like going to a class. Take your iPad to the range and then you do that and then shoot the drill. Like, it's the same. It's the same thing for the class. So for me, it's about, guys that want the information, that are willing to do the work, figuring out a way to get them the information.
Yeah.
Right. That's the most important thing.
Yeah. So again, I'll just go back to the whole fitness thing. That's what I saw work too. A lot of people, they built these massive followings and then something happened, their account got hijacked or whatever, and everything was on Instagram. Their entire business was on Instagram. They're following. People depended on them, right? Whether it's maybe their business partners in some way, with regard to sharing content or collaborations or things like that. It's all there, and they own no real estate on any other platform. You are leasing space on Instagram, right? So if you're not giving the people that do depend on you or are following you and are supporting you a different platform or a different way to be in contact with you, I think that's a lot. You have a lot of liability there, right? And yes, because one day it could get turned off, but maybe they get turned off and on their end, and they can't communicate or whatever the case is. Like, I think it's super smart. And I think there's different platforms and ways to do that. And I'm sure you'll figure it out. It's going to be one more thing you got to manage with all the things you're trying to do.
And that's the hard part.
Welcome to the nightmare,
People
bro.
Don't get, exactly. Dude, that's you. Same thing.
Welcome to the nightmare.
Dude, there's no team. Like, I probably need to get one, but I don't know.
It's just a me. There's a me and team.
Hey,
all you got, bro.
My team is 2 phones. Now I can film from 2 different angles.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, again, thanks for sharing that at the end there. I appreciate you guys. Thanks for coming down. As always, you guys have been so supportive of me and such an advocate for the things that I've been trying to do and helping people and providing information. I appreciate you guys sharing yours with me so that we in this format, so that we can put it out there. If there's anything I can do to help you guys and support you guys in whatever way possible, don't ever hesitate to ask. Appreciate you.
Right. Too easy, Scott. Thank you.